Thomas Kelly Brown was an 18-year-old from Canadian Texas. He was the president of his class and loved acting and public speaking. On the night of November 23, 2016, Thomas was on his way home after hanging out with friends. He stopped to get gas in his Dodge Durango. He was never seen again. I'm Ed Dentzel, and this is Unfound. I am all in a sea of wonders. I doubt, I fear, I think strange things, which I dare not confess to my own soul. Who said that? No, it's not an original Dentzel saying. Those lines come from Bram Stoker. Yep, the guy who brought us Dracula. I could have chosen any one of hundreds of idioms concerning the topic of doubt, from Voltaire to Descartes, from George Carlin to Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Yet, I chose this one because it most accurately captures my feelings about the case you'll hear today. I have discovered things. Yes, original new facts, never heard before, the meanings of which I'm still not sure I'm willing to confess to myself. And you know that's certainly something, considering all the unusual and unbelievable yet true facts we have brought to the public on Unfound over the last 80-plus cases. Moreover, we don't like doubting people, especially ones we've come to trust because we've known them for a long time, or they are in positions where their ethics are supposed to keep everything in order. Yet today, after this episode, you're going to have doubts about what happened in Canadian Texas on November 23, 2016. The most popular theories will be overtaken with a scenario you may not want to confess to yourself. And you'll also be wondering how just one guy, a year and a half after the fact, in Florida, was able to discover some key facts that media companies and other programs never did. And why didn't the sowing of the seeds of doubt by the media start a lot sooner? And now, summary of the case. This is brought to you by my friend Megan Goodsite, charlieproject.org. Thomas Brown, by all accounts, was a son just about any parent would love to have. Smart, outgoing, kind, athletic. Thomas was president of his class. He got the lead in drama productions at Canadian High School. He was on the football team and managed to keep his grades very respectable despite all these extracurricular activities. That's not to say that everything was perfect in his life. Just 10 days before he disappeared, Thomas and his girlfriend broke up. It was a mutual decision, but heartache at 18 is never easy. In addition, and once again not long before his disappearance, Thomas had quit the football team because the coach replaced him on the offensive line. Yet Thomas kept his head up and dove even deeper into his other interests. So, on the night of November 23, 2016, Thomas was out with his friends Caleb and Christian. At approximately 11:20 p.m., the three rode back to Thomas's Durango parked in the Canadian Middle School parking lot. The three left in their own cars, with Thomas headed towards 2nd Street. Minutes later, from both a sales receipt and an eyewitness, we know Thomas stopped at Frank's Gas and Oil to fill up his SUV. His curfew was midnight, but Thomas never reached his house. He was never seen again. His Durango was found the next morning, parked in a secluded area on the outskirts of town. A drop of blood and the casing of a .25 caliber bullet were found inside. Over 6 weeks later, his backpack, computer, and other items were found across the Canadian River several miles away. None of these items led to discovering what happened to Thomas. His case remains unsolved. In addition to the information already on the public record for Thomas's case, this episode will cover the following new points never revealed until today. A photograph of Thomas pumping gas that night that the sheriff showed the Brown family early on, but he now says it never existed. A run-in Thomas had with the sheriff over a year before that could be characterized as harassment. and new video footage from the night of November 23, 2016, that not only calls into question the identification of Thomas's Durango, but also reveals vehicle movements and improbable coincidences that paint a whole new possibility for that night. The family does not believe Thomas ran away or committed suicide. They believe he met with foul play. The interview for this episode is with Thomas's mother, Penny Meek. Unfound news. Unfound may yet get another chance to be a part of a missing persons TV show. This would be in conjunction with my friend Megan Good's site, charlieproject.org. A TV producer approached her about creating a show focusing on minorities and their disappearances. Then Megan reported the information in the Unfound podcast discussion group. I would love to be a part of a program like that. I hope it happens. Next, I once again got a nasty message from someone saying that I'm not fair in my reporting. Once again, for the record, with feeling, any person of interest or suspect or anyone else who thinks I have misrepresented a disappearance on this program is welcome to contact me. I'm easy to find. You can expect to be treated with respect. I will report your side of the story, but I will not baby you. And if I think you're being evasive or you are lying, I will tell my audience. You've been warned. Finally, Unfound made a list. Indies to watch at radiopublic.com. You don't know how much I love the quote-unquote indie word in that title. We are certainly independent here. Where you can find Unfound. Unfound is on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, iTunes, Podomatic, Stitcher, Podbean, and Spotify. You can email the program, unfoundpodcast@gmail.com. Please check out the Unfound live show every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Time on the Unfound page. The website, unfoundpodcast.com. Please check out the secret Stephen Kocher episode. The website at Trib Total Media, triblive.com/news/unfound. Unfound has Patreon and PayPal accounts. Your contributions provide for many of the items guests have received so far. I cannot thank all of Unfound supporters enough. This week I need to thank Angel and Dara. Unfound merchandise, volumes 1, 2, and 3 on Amazon in both paperback and ebook form. Let's work on getting some great reviews for volumes 2 and 3. If you've bought them, please go to Amazon.com and give them a great review. The playing cards, go to makeplayingcards.com/sell/Unfound podcast. Shirts for almost all Unfound's cases at Shopify.com. Just do a search for Unfound. And please mention Unfound on all true crime Facebook pages and other websites and forums. Thank you. I'm so fortunate to have on this episode of Unfound the mother of Thomas Brown, Penny Meek. Penny, welcome to Unfound.
Thank you, Ed.
Let's start here. Tell the listeners a little bit about your son, Thomas. And first of all, you have a couple children. Why don't you first talk about that?
Okay, yes. I have two children, Tucker and Thomas. Thomas is the youngest son. Tucker is recently graduated from college, and Thomas should be in college right now.
So how many years older is Tucker? So maybe 4 years older? Three years older?
3. Yeah.
3 years older?
Almost 3, not quite.
Okay. And how did Thomas and his older brother Tucker get along? Good kids?
Yeah, they're good kids. Boys are boys, and they wrestle and fight and punch and, all the normal stuff that boys and I think especially brothers do. But for the most part, they had each other's back, and, if someone was picking on, one of them, they were going to stand up for them. And I think once Tucker went to college, they even got closer because, I just think they realized, how much they really enjoyed each other's company. But sometimes you have to be apart to know to get how much you really miss that person
Sure.
or need that person or want to be around that person. And I know that once Tucker went to college that there was lots of text messaging between the two of them, and phone conversations that I didn't even know about that took place. And so
Mm,
I know that they had probably even gotten closer.
that's good. Good. And yes, we're not going to say the school, but Tucker went to college out of state. So
Right.
Thomas, he went to school, and so Tucker or Thomas is home alone, I guess, with
Yes.
you going to school. And what was Thomas into growing up? As a child, maybe becoming a teenager. What were his interests?
He was very interested in drama, theater. I think that was, well, I don't think, I know that that was really his love, was, speaking in front of people, acting. So that was his first love. But he was also involved in football. He did student government. He was involved in his youth at church. He was just involved in a lot of activities.
Hmm. And in fact, when you say student government, he was actually what, president of his class or president of student council his senior year?
He was he had been a member of student council, I think, throughout high school, but he had been the president of his class for 2 years.
Wow, he must have been popular. He must have been a guy that the other kids really liked.
Yes, he was very well liked by his
Mm.
peers. All of them. I mean, it wasn't just his group of peers that really liked him. I mean, he was well liked by all the kids in the high school, and he had also helped with. We have a theater camp, and he had been a counselor for theater camp for probably about 5 years. And so even those little kids that attended theater camp knew who Thomas was, and they really loved and enjoyed being around him.
Hmm. Yeah, I have to say that way back in the day, the 80s, I was in drama club myself, and it's a good time, putting on plays
Yeah.
and musicals and things. And I actually, once I became an adult, I got to do that a little bit myself when I lived in Las Vegas. So it's a good time. It's a good way to learn to work with other people on stage. Working with other people. It's a good time. But he's popular.
Yep.
He's into sports. Seemed like you raised a well-rounded kid, Penny.
I hope so.
Okay, and how did he do in school? How were his grades and everything?
He made good grades. AB student. Um, he probably could have made better grades than he did, but he was the kind of kid who, he probably could have made a 98, but he was good with a 91. So he's a very smart young man, and particularly in like English classes and literature classes. And I also taught English for a while at high school, and so sometimes they would be reading uh, literature that I had taught or that I was interested in that maybe didn't teach, and I would ask him questions about it, and he would come up with things or tell me things about what he was reading or what they had read that was like I had never heard it ever from any other students that I had ever taught, and it was just I'm not saying that he was always right or always, maybe on target, but just his view of literature, and movies was just completely different than what a normal, I think, student would have thought or said about it.
Hmm. That is interesting. That
Yeah.
is okay. Okay. As a teenager, maybe let's just say junior high school into early high school, anything that ever worried you about Thomas at all? Any behavior, any suspicious friends, or anything like that that really
Mhm.
made you pause, if you can reveal something like that?
Right. As a mother, I think you always worry about things about your kids or things that something's not going well or going right. But for the most part, I would say no. I think that he was like a lot of other teenage kids, and He and his father and I had divorced when he was young, and I'm, fairly certain that had an impact on his life. And but even so, as far as growing up, he wasn't into anything like drugs or anything like that at all. Just he played video games, and I didn't always appreciate some of the video games that he played because they tend to drop the f-bomb a lot. But
Right.
I just
Right.
think but I think for that generation of kids that they're used to that, and that's just kind of how it goes. I don't have
Mm.
to approve of all of it, but that's just kind of their life. And it never really caused me concern to think that he was going to grow up to be some, I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
bad person because he played a video game that had swear words in it. So,
Okay.
but for the most part, no. I mean, most of his friends, I knew them. There was only one that had moved here recently that was kind of a troubled guy, but Thomas, they didn't hang out a ton, and when they did hang out, it was in a group situation. So really didn't cause tons of concern.
Okay. You mentioned that you and Thomas's father got divorced. Was that a situation where then you had custody of Thomas, I guess, a majority of the time? And did Thomas's father remain in Canadian Texas, or did he move elsewhere?
Actually, we lived in another community not too far from here, and that's where we divorced from. And I moved back to Canadian because Canadian is my hometown. It's where I grew up. It's where my family was. And so I came back for that support. And, his dad did remain and has remained a part of his life. Obviously not to the extent as having custody, but,
Mm-hmm.
he attended his events, and, they would visit on the phone and stuff like that.
Okay. And so how often would you say that let's just say that once Thomas learned to drive, say 16 years old, how often did Thomas get to see his father?
Well, just like, I think that really beginning in junior high when he really started getting involved into sports and things like that, their time together kind of dwindled because they start getting to an age where they want to spend time with their friends, and
Yeah.
hanging out with your parents is not cool. And so it dwindled, but it's like I said, as far as his events and everything like that, his dad always showed up for them. And and he would, if he was coming through Canadian going somewhere, because he tends to travel with his job, he might call and say, hey, could I take the boys to dinner, or could I take them to lunch, or which of course was always yes. But
Sure.
yeah.
And how far away was his father from Canadian?
About 50 miles.
Okay,
So
so
not too
not
far.
far, not far.
No.
45-minute drive
Mhm.
in Texas. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
One more thing before we get closer to the time of the disappearance. He did have a girlfriend. Thomas did have a girlfriend. We're just going to use her first name, although I know her last name's out there but for this conversation,
Right.
we're just going to use her first name. Her name is Sage. She was actually a grade ahead of Thomas. W- how was their relationship, and how did that all happen? What did you think of it?
Well, Thomas and Sage had been dating for just a little more than a year when they broke up. I really liked Sage, and I really felt like Sage and Thomas had a really neat relationship. When you're in high school, you don't always know or expect relationships to go a lot further. And I had always told Thomas, when Sage goes to college, you may break up, but you're always going to be good friends with her, because they talked and texted on the phone a lot. And Sage had lost her mom when she was a very young child, and so they both have some things going on in their lives that are not always typical of family situations. And So I just felt like he and Sage were just really good for each other because I know that they discussed some of those things together, and they were in drama together, and they just, I think they just had some things that they were, that they were both very interested in. And but Sage was a year older, and so she had gone off to college, and they had, remained boyfriend girlfriend, and then in about, well, I guess about 10 days before Thomas went missing, they broke up. And Thomas had just been to see her because her college that she was attending was only a couple hours from here. And
Mm-hmm.
so he had gone to spend a Sunday with her. And so it was just not long, a few days after that, they broke up. And I was a little surprised. But he told me that, their breakup was mutual. And I guess the day that he went to see her, they had really, discussed, Thomas just didn't have a feel for going to the same college that she was at. And so I think there was a lot of concern on both of them that, he would go somewhere off, further off. They would be further away from each other, and it just wasn't going to work.
Yeah.
And so, I thought they were pretty mature in their thinking. And, I think it was probably sad for both of them, but they were still friends and they were still texting, because even a few days after they broke up, Thomas was texting someone, and I said, "Hey, who are you texting?" And he said, "Sage." And I said, "Well, I thought you broke up." And, and he said, "Well, we did," but he goes, "We're still friends." And so,
Mm-hmm.
it was, in fact, she had sent Thomas a school paper that she had written for college and asked him to look over it before she submitted it. So, they were still friends.
There was a mutual
Yeah.
respect there, and they just very mature decision, I guess, on their part. They're going different
Yes.
directions. Maybe Thomas goes to college, maybe in Oklahoma or something, and she's still in Texas. Maybe 4 or 5
Right.
hours away. It's hard to keep something like that going, whether you're 18,
Hmm.
19, or 30. It's hard.
Exactly. It is hard.
It's hard.
So,
So what you're saying is this breakup that happened not long before he disappeared was something mutual. It didn't have anything to do with one of them cheating on the other or anything like that. It just was that Thomas was going to be graduating and he wasn't going to be going to the same school. He just didn't know where it was going.
right.
All right. Okay.
Yep.
All right. So there's nothing, no salaciousness there, I guess, as maybe you
No.
might see in other teenage relationships. Nothing like that.
No.
Okay.
No.
How did
And
you
in
feel?
fact,
Please,
the
please
night
go.
before he went missing, there was a basketball game in town. The high school kids were playing basketball, and Sage, I worked the gate that night, and Sage came through the gate, and we spoke. And
Mhm.
then I'm pretty sure she and Thomas spoke at the basketball game. Not tons, but I know that they were friendly. And so, yeah, there was nothing going on that would have caused concern that Sage would have been involved in anything.
Okay. And just for the record, those days after they broke up, you got to see Thomas. Did he seem depressed or down? Any regrets about that? Once again, as much as a mother can know about something like that, what do you think?
Sure. Well, I'm sure that that Thomas and Sage were both, somewhat sad and upset, that's, what happened. But, like you said, it's just part of life, and it's just hard to keep those relationships going when you're not, relatively close to each other and can see each other. And, so yeah, I'm sure that he was a little bit sad, but not to the point, that he was just deeply depressed and he couldn't function, or anything like that.
Okay. He probably maybe just handled it like maybe any other 18-year-old would, kind of down and
Sure.
everything, but was going to pick himself up back up.
Right.
And he was president of his class, so he was very popular. So if he wanted to maybe find another girlfriend or something like that, maybe wouldn't have been as big of a problem.
No, and he had
Okay.
tons of guy friends too
Sure.
that they like to hang out together. So
Sure.
yeah, I think it was fine.
Okay. Um, I think we need to do this because so many of the disappearances we cover on Unfound take place in major cities. Just within recent weeks, coincidentally, I covered another disappearance in Texas, but in Lubbock, and it covered a disappearance in San Francisco. We've done disappearances in Albany, New York. I mean, major cities in the United States, capitals of states. But Canadian Texas, a little bit the opposite of that. You grew up there. Why don't you explain to the people who maybe you never even heard of Canadian Texas a little bit about the town?
It's a small town, about 2,500 people, very close knit. When there's a football game on Friday night, the town is emptied. Especially if it's out of town, people are traveling to the football game. Very close knit, very involved and supportive, especially of our schools and our students. Um, Lots of, people who have been here for several generations. Um, their families tend to come back just like I did. I came back. My boys are actually fifth generation here in Canadian. It's just a small town. I would say there is maybe an unusual amount of wealth here. We have lots of large ranches, lots of oil field play, some things like that. It's kind of I would say it's a little bit unique to some of the other communities in our area. Not that we're better than anybody else, but it is a little bit unique. We kind of the way our town sits, it kind of sits on a hill. It's near a river. It's really a very beautiful community here in Texas, because some parts of Texas are just completely flat, and other,
Yeah.
it's kind of odd. And so, but it's a really nice, quiet place, a great place to raise your kids. You don't have to worry too much about, your kids being out and about. Um, if they're doing something that they should not be doing, your neighbor, or, everybody knows everybody. So it's
Hmm.
pretty hard to get away with something that, and I've always told my kids that don't do anything that you're going to regret, because I will find out about it. So, keep your nose clean. And, I think that our teenagers here, I think, are typical of teenagers in most other communities. Especially in small towns, you leave your house, you drive around, you find a spot where everybody gets out and hangs out and listens to music, or, just things like that. But for the most part, very, very quiet, very, um, just not tons of stuff going on, just not lots of happenings.
Okay. Let's put it this way, how many stoplights in Canadian Texas?
Two.
Just two. Two.
Yes.
And people should know I come from Leechburg, Pennsylvania. It's about the same size as
Hmm.
Canadian Texas, and it also has two stoplights. So
Yeah.
even though I've never been to Canadian Texas, I feel like I know what Canadian Texas is like. So it's 2,500 people, not necessarily out in the middle of nowhere. It's close to Oklahoma and everything, but it's 2,500
Yeah.
people, and you have two stoplights.
Yeah.
Okay, great, and it's like the rest of Texas, a huge football tradition. However, we
Yeah.
should note that I did find in just reading some things about Canadian, there was a cop who was shot and killed in Canadian years
Yes.
ago, like 15 years ago.
Yes.
Something happened.
Um, Right. Now that may have happened. I might not have been living here, although
Mm.
you would think that I would remember that. But I do know that in the 1980s, in the early 1980s, there was I believe he was the sheriff, and he was shot and killed responding
Mm.
to an alarm that had gone off, and his son was in my class. That's
Oh, okay.
one of the reasons I remember that. Um, yeah, but as far as crime, not a lot of crime. I'm trying to think about, I know about 20, I'm going to say about 20 years ago, there was a lady who worked in a convenience store on the edge of town. Um, she was murdered in the convenience store. But,
Was that solved?
crimes like that, yes, it was.
Okay.
It was, yeah.
All right.
In fact, I think both of those two were solved, but crimes like that are just kind of few and far between.
Right. That's the feeling I got too. But I think it was 2003. I think that this sheriff was going somewhere to serve a warrant or something, and a gunfight
Oh,
broke out, and he was shot and killed. I think that's what I
I think I
remember
kind of remember that.
from
Yeah.
2003. I forget his name though. So what you're
Okay.
saying is right now in Canadian Texas, the biggest mystery is your son missing.
Yes.
That's the biggest
Yes.
story maybe in Canadian, and people are wondering what happened.
Yes.
Okay. One more thing before we get into that night, and it also has to do, and there's been some speculation as the internets like to do. People
Hmm.
reading about this case. Not long before Thomas disappeared, he also quit the football team, and you'd said that he was into sports. Was very popular.
Hmm.
I think he was a starter on the team. Can you explain to the listeners what actually went down with him quitting the football team? I guess a few games into the season.
Well, of course, it was his senior year, and he was a starter on the football team, and I don't. I have no idea how coaches pick and choose who gets to play. And as a teacher or as an educator in our community, I have to work with some of these coaches. And so I definitely don't want any of them to think that I'm bad mouthing them, because I'm really not. I really do like them. But,
Mm-hmm.
for whatever reason, Thomas was a starter, and then just kind of all of a sudden he wasn't anymore. And there was, nobody told him that he wasn't going to start or that he wasn't going to play. And so the very first game that he didn't play in, I mean, I was shocked. I mean, I didn't know, Thomas didn't know, and we're sitting in the stands, and tons of other parents and people sitting around me are going, hey, is Thomas hurt? Why isn't Thomas playing? Why isn't Thomas out there? Thomas hasn't played it down. Where is he? And I'm like going, I don't have any idea. I mean, I don't think he's hurt. He didn't tell me that he was hurt. I don't think he got hurt in warm up, And
Okay.
so I'm as baffled by it as they are. And so at the end of the game, Thomas comes off the field. Well, he's in tears because he did not play and had no idea that he wasn't going to play, doesn't know why he didn't get to play. And so we talk about it over the weekend, and I'm normally the parent that, if you start something, you finish it. But so Thomas and I talk about it over the weekend, and of course he wants to quit. And I said to him, like I said, he is a senior. He's about to go to college, and I said, you know, um, if you really feel like you want to quit, that's okay. Um, but I'm not talking to your coaches. If you're going to quit, then you have to be man enough to go talk to your coaches and tell, and
Mm-hmm.
I said, first of all, ask them, why am I being benched? Why am I not, I said, see if you can figure it out. See if you're going to play, are you going to, split time with somebody? And he kept saying, no, I'm not. He goes, I'm on the bench. I'm going to be on the bench. I'm not going to play. He goes, I know that I'm not. I said, okay. I said, well, it is worth asking. But I said, I'm not talking to the coaches. And so we talk about it off and on throughout the weekend. And as Sunday night rolls around, I said, okay, so, what are you thinking? What are you going to do? And he said, I'm going to go talk to the coaches, but I really feel like I'm going to quit. And I said, okay. I said, tell me why. And he said, well, first of all, he said, I like football, but he said, I love drama. And we are starting our fall theater production. And he said, I have a great part and I'm very excited about it. And he said, you know what? He said, I'm a senior. And he said, I'm about to go to college. I am not going to wear a football jersey. I'm not going to be on a football team again, in 6 or 7 or 8 weeks, whenever our football season ends. That's it. It's over. I'm done. I'm never going to do that again. I like it, but I'm never going to do it again. But drama or theater or speech, that's my ticket. That's how I'm going to make my living. That's what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. That's what I want to do, is use my voice or use my drama or theater acting skills, to have a job. And so he said, I also have 4 college classes that I'm taking and Spanish too. And he said, I just don't feel like I should put in several hours a day of football to stand on the sidelines when I have these classes, these courses that are hard that I need to be working on and passing. And I would really rather focus on theater. And so I told him that was okay with me.
Okay. So when he went in and that next week he quit, did he ever get an explanation of why he had been replaced? And he was a lineman that he had gotten replaced on, I guess, the offensive line. Did he ever get an explanation? Did he ever tell you what that was? And have you ever heard anything since?
The only thing the offensive line coach told him that he wasn't sure that he trusted Thomas to block all the time. I don't really buy it.
All right. Well, if you don't buy it, then what do you think the other explanation is? I need to ask that. If you don't buy that, and that's what you're telling me, a year and a half after Thomas disappeared, then what do you think the real story was?
I think there was a young man who is playing college football right now, and I think they needed a position for him on the team so that recruiters could come watch him play.
Okay. So he was an underclassman, like a junior or something? Or?
No, he was a senior.
Oh.
But he had lived here, and then they had moved away, and he came back in the middle of their junior year. And so he had not played football with this group since he was in middle school, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the coaches really didn't, in my estimation, the coaches, I think, really probably didn't know what he could do. And so I think that that's part of the reason why. And apparently there were some colleges that had looked at him at a sports camp that he had done earlier in the summer. And so I think that was the reason, but I can't say that with certainty.
Is this, please don't say the kid's name, but is he playing college football at like a major school or?
He is.
Okay.
He did get to play last year some, so.
Okay. So, Thomas gets replaced by another senior. You're believing because colleges were interested in this other kid. And how many games was this? Was this halfway through the season? Maybe they played 10 games, maybe 5 games, or what do you think?
Yeah, it was about halfway through the season.
Okay. And how long did this happen? Did this quitting of football happen before Thomas disappeared?
It had been almost 2 months, 6 to 8 weeks.
All right,
like
so
it's been a little while.
All right, so him breaking up with his girlfriend was much closer to the disappearance than this football issue was.
Yes.
Okay.
And the head football coach did catch Thomas in the hall about a week, I guess, after Thomas quit, and called him into his office, and he said, hey, he goes, I don't feel like things went well, the day that you quit. And he said, I don't want it to end that way. And he told Tom, he said, I think you're a great kid. And he said, you're going to be fine. And after that, Thomas would talk to the coaches in the hall before the game on Friday night. And they would discuss how they thought, the Wildcats were going to do. So,
all right. So there was no hard feelings. There was no hard feelings there.
No.
Okay. And so what you're saying is, really, by the time Thomas disappeared, that football thing was probably well in the rearview mirror. He was moving on to other things. He had put it behind him. Okay. Thank you for explaining that to the listeners. Thank you. Anything else of note that you can think of now? Maybe it seemed like a big deal at the time, but anything of note? Maybe I should ask you this. How did Thomas's father feel about him quitting football?
He was probably a little more upset about it than I was. I'm sure that's kind of a dad thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I really think though that after, a couple of 2 or 3 weeks after, I think that his dad kind of, I think he came around and kind of was in agreement with, Thomas and I, and, that it wasn't a huge deal. And Thomas had turned his focus to his courses, and his grades were really coming up. He was making better grades than he had in a while.
Mm-hmm.
And then of course he had completely turned to theater, and he did have a great part in the fall theater production that they
Uh,
were about 3 weeks away from performing.
I'm not here to get into the relationship between you and your ex-husband, but did you and he have a
Sure.
chance to talk about Thomas quitting football after it happened? You two personally have a
Yeah,
conversation?
we did. I mean, we talked about it before and after.
Oh, okay. Okay. So maybe, of course, like you said, Thomas's father goes to the games. He was there when Thomas didn't get to play, so he saw what
Hmm.
happened. And so, of
Yeah.
course, then at that point, I'm sure you two might have said something to each other at the game. I'm not
Yeah.
saying you necessarily had to sit together or anything, but
Right.
you ran, you run into each other. You're probably both disappointed. Thomas comes off the field. You get to talk to him, and you had a chance to talk about that. But in the end, you believe a couple weeks after Thomas quit football that his father was okay with it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I
All
do.
right. All right. So anything else that maybe is something maybe a little unique, that anything that happened before Thomas disappeared in those weeks before? Anything that
I
pops up?
can't think of anything you know, that happened that was abnormal. It just seemed like normal life. Like I said, I'm
Mm-hmm.
an educator, so I was, getting up and going to my job, and he was going to school. And like I said, after he quit the football team, his grades, had gotten better. And, he just had more time to spend, studying. And, no, I mean, there was nothing unusual that I can think of.
Okay. And you say that you were a teacher in the Canadian school district?
Yes.
Okay. So you was it like did so were you in the same building as Thomas was as a senior?
No, I was not. I teach
Uh-uh.
elementary. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay. Just
Yeah.
wondering. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so then let's move on to the night before Thanksgiving 2016. Tell the listeners about that night, and what you've learned about Thomas goes out with two of his friends, Caleb and Christian, and we should tell the listeners Christian, although that's generally considered to be a boy's name, she's actually a girl.
Yes.
Christian. Thomas is out with these two, and what have you learned,
Yes.
and what went on?
Well, I think we did not have school the day before Thanksgiving. We were out of school, and Thomas's brother Tucker had come home for the Thanksgiving break, and the Wednesday before, everything was very normal. In fact, about around lunchtime on Wednesday, there was a girl who had lived here prior, had gone to school here. She and Thomas were good friends, and she was in town. And so we had eaten brunch, really. We'd eaten about 10 o'clock probably. And so the next thing you know, Thomas showers and he says, "Hey, I'm going to go hang out with these two girls." And so, okay, they're both great girls, no cause for concern there. He comes back about, mid afternoon. I had been to the grocery store. He saw that I had some stuff to make some queso, one of his favorite things to eat. He said, "I'm really hungry. Are you going to make that?" And I said, "Well, I can make it now if you want me to." And so I had made some queso. He had eaten it. And then about 6:15, he said, "Hey, I'm going to go hang out with Caleb." And Christian, he knew he was hanging out with Christian later. And he said, "Can I have your debit card so that I can get gas, because I am about out." And so I had told him yes. And so he had gotten my debit card, and then he left. But there was, that is completely normal. a normal thing for him to do. And shortly after he left, I did text him and I said, "Hey, on Friday we need to do this. Please remind me." And he had responded to my text, and then that was it. Because when he hangs out with his friends, I'm just not concerned. I'm not normally concerned because I know his friends, I know who he's hanging out with, so it's just not cause for concern. About 12, it was shortly after 12. Tucker he had been at our house all day, and he had a friend, one of his friends had come over, and they were just hanging out and they were playing Xbox. And so shortly after 12, I walked into the living room and I said, "Did Thomas come in?" And Tucker said no. And I said, "Well, it's a little bit after 12 and Thomas never misses curfew. Have you talked to him?" And Tucker said, "Well," he said, "I just sent him a text message, but he didn't respond." And so I wasn't overly concerned about that either, because I just thought, well, he's just not, it's his brother, so he's just not responding to him right now because he doesn't want to. So I said, okay. I said, well, I'll text him. So then I sent him a text message, and I waited a few minutes and he didn't respond, which was very unusual because Thomas always, especially around curfew time, he was going to respond to my text messages or my calls, generally text, but he was going to respond right away.
Mm-hmm.
So I send a text, and I wait a few minutes and I don't get it. He doesn't respond. And so I said to Tucker, I said, well, that's really, really strange that he's not responding, especially to my text. And so Tucker says, okay, no problem. He goes, I'll just text him again. So Tucker sends a text message. We wait a few minutes. There's no response. So I said, okay, I'm going to send him another one. So I send another one, and wait a few minutes. And then in a little bit, I look at my phone. My first message was delivered. My second message was not. And so I said to Tucker, I said, hey, this is weird. I said, and I was really pretty already concerned because Thomas just doesn't miss curfew. He never has missed curfew. Even if he's going to be 2 or 3 minutes late, he would text me. Usually he was getting a snack somewhere downtown, and he would say, hey, I'm here getting a snack. Do you want something? I'm on my way. And when Thomas said he was on his way, that's what he meant. And I mean, in less than 5 minutes, he would show up. So anyway, Tucker looks at his phone and he said, well, mine's the same. He said, my first one says delivered. My second one does not. And I said, that's very strange, because I said, that's like his phone is off. And I said, Thomas would never turn his phone off. And Tucker said, I agree. And then he said, well, what do you think's going on? And I said, I don't know. But I said, this isn't right. This isn't normal for Thomas. And so then I tried, I think it was around 12:30. I did try to call his phone. It went immediately to voicemail. And so I said to Tucker, I said, well, something is wrong, because he's not responding to any, his cell phone. Yeah. And I said, it's like it's off. And I said, there's no way Thomas did not turn his phone off. And so I said, do you think maybe he's had an accident? He can't respond. And so anyway, Tucker and I left the house right away. He and his friends went in Tucker's car, and I went in my car. And at the time, my husband and I had bought some land. We were getting ready to build a house. And so I left our house in town and came out to our house, which really, it's not far outside of Canadian. So I came there first, and then I'm close to a county road that I knew that Thomas had been driving on, because we had gotten some rain, and he and his friends had gotten stuck on that road, like literally stuck in the mud, and somebody had to pull them out. And so I drove up that road for a while, but then it didn't make sense to me that he had gone too far on that road, and he really didn't have any friends that lived on the road. And so then I turned around and went back, and I went to a road that's called Marshall Drive. And he does have some friends, Caleb being one of them, that lives on Marshall Drive. And I drove all the way out to where one of his friends lives, which is probably, I would say, about 3 miles outside of town. And I kind of pulled up, in their driveway, didn't see Thomas's car there. So I turned around and came back, and I drove past Caleb's house, but their house is gated, and so you can't just drive down to their house, and so I
Yeah.
really couldn't see down there, and so I drove on back into town, and I'm not really sure. I don't remember exactly which way that I went, but I pretty much came home. I think I spent a little time driving around town, and then I pretty much went back to our house.
Let's
And
just break this down. So when you left the house, you went in one direction, Tucker went in the other. Did you go south or did he go south? And people can look at Canadian Texas on a map, but
sure.
did you go to the south of town and he went to the north? I mean, how did you plan this out as to where
Mhm.
you two were going to look for him?
Honestly, we really didn't plan it. We just left. And
Okay.
I just figured that Tucker knew more about where the high school kids would hang out. And I just kind of assumed that's where he would go check. And I just went to check the places that I knew Thomas sometimes drove around.
Yeah.
Um, so we really didn't plan where we were going, but for the most part, I did go to the south, and Tucker did go to the north.
Okay. And so you're out, like you said, you went down a road that where Thomas got stuck. At one
Yes.
point with some friends. You went to a friend's house. You went by
Mhm.
Caleb's, but you couldn't look into see their driveway because he lives in a gated community. What time would you say that you got home?
I got home at about 1:45. Well, between 1:45 and 2, maybe closer to 2. And my husband is not a night owl at all, so he had been asleep. I had woken him up to tell him that Thomas did not come home and that Tucker and I were going to go look for him. And so when I came back, he was still, I think he was still awake, I think, from when I had left. And so I said, well, I don't really know what to do because I said, this is just not like Thomas, which he agreed. And I said, I don't think that he is with Caleb, but I said, I don't really know that I have any other choice except to call them and just, see if maybe he's there. The boys fell asleep. I mean,
Yeah.
I said, I don't know. So
Right.
it was probably a little before 2 a.m. I called Caleb's mom, Robin, and I said, I'm sorry to bother you, but I know that Caleb and Thomas were hanging out. And I said, Thomas isn't home. And she was very alarmed by that as well. And so she went to wake Caleb up, and Caleb was also very shocked that Thomas had not come home. I could hear the whole conversation that Robin was having with Caleb. Caleb immediately texted Christian and another boy that Thomas had hung out with for a little bit before he got in with Christian and Caleb, and his name is Michael. And he texted both of them. Christian responded right away. She was also very shocked that Thomas had not come home. It took a little bit longer for Michael to respond, but I would say by about 2:15, 2:20, Robin and Caleb and Christian they all left their houses to go look, and then shortly after that, Michael also did. And all this time, Tucker and his friend are out looking as well. After I spoke with Robin, I just called dispatch rather than 911. My husband is a firefighter, a volunteer fireman for our community. And so he just gave me the direct number to the sheriff's department. And so I basically just called dispatch.
All right,
And, I told them,
let's break this down just a little bit more for the
okay,
listeners, if we could. Let's break this down for the listeners. So you have all these people out a little after 2 in the morning. You got yourself. Of course, you came back, but you were out for a while. Tucker and a friend of his is still out. Christian and Caleb, and I guess Robin is Caleb's mother.
Yeah.
Okay, they're out now looking for him. And this is in a town that has 2,500 people with 2 stoplights, and none of you saw either, of course, Thomas nor his Durango.
No.
Okay, so it's not like you're looking for him in Houston. You're looking for him in Canadian, and no hide nor hair of Thomas.
No.
Okay, very, very interesting. Okay, so please continue.
So I would say at about 2:15, I call the dispatch number for the sheriff's department and tell them that my son is missing, and it's just super unusual for him to miss curfew. All of his friends are seemingly at home, so I'm not sure why Thomas isn't, or where he is. Um, she tells me she will alert the deputy on duty. Um, I think it took about 45 minutes for the deputy to respond to my call. He did call me and said that he was going to go out looking. Um, he showed up at my house at about 10 till 4. Tucker had come back to the house around 3:30, so he's back at the house. I know that Robin, Caleb, and Christian and Michael are still looking. Tucker comes back to my house about 20 minutes later, so 10 till 4. The deputy shows up at our house and says, "Hey, I don't know where Sage lives. Can you give me directions?" Well, Sage lives in the country. And so Tucker says, "Well, I know where Sage lives if I can ride with you." And so the deputy says, "Yeah, sure, that's okay."
And who was?
So
And
Tucker,
we should get the deputy's name on the record. Who is the
sure,
deputy at this time?
Pine Gregory.
Pine Gregory. Okay, thank you.
Yes. So Tucker goes with Deputy Gregory to out to to Sage's house, and then I'm not really sure where all he went with the deputy. I know that he brought Tucker home at around 6 o'clock that morning.
6 a.m.
I believe.
And okay, so you have all these people driving around, some even maybe going outside of town. You yourself even went on some back road that sounds to me like cars could get stuck there. So
Yes.
no, I'm not saying that you went down every street of Canadian Texas, but you were all over that town. And once again, no signs of Thomas's Durango.
No.
None. And we should note, if people don't know, that at the time, it wasn't, I mean, I'm going to imagine there are a lot of red Dodge Durangos in Texas, but Thomas's was particularly unique. Why is that?
Thomas's Durango, and there are 3 or 4 other Durangos in town that are very similar to Thomas's, but Thomas's had writing, white writing on all of the windows except for the windshield. That's just something that the cheerleaders do when school starts. They write stuff on all of the football boys' windows. And so Thomas still had the writing on his windows.
Even, just to be clear, even almost 2 months after he quit the football team.
Yes.
All right, I want to come back to that later. So his vehicle was uniquely marked that would stand out to anybody. And they may not know that it was Thomas driving, but they would know, man, that Durango sure looks different.
Right.
Even at night. Even at night. And I think the listeners should know that I think what the cheerleaders and people do who do those things, I think they use shoe polish. They use white shoe polish to
Yes, I think,
use,
yeah.
because then it's easy to take off afterwards. Okay, so
Right.
you're cruising around. Then your son Tucker is with Pine Gregory, one of the deputies. He's not he's not a local cop. He is a sheriff for the county of Hemphill County, not technically Canadian. He's not a local towny cop, but he's a deputy for all of the county
For the
and
entire county, yes.
for the entire county. And they're driving around for 2 hours. Has Tucker ever told you where they went, what location in town, and what their conversation was?
All I know for sure is that they did drive out. I don't know if they went all the way to Sage's house, but I know they went out that way. I'm assuming they went all the way, but I don't know that for sure. And then I know that I would say around 5:30, 5:45, somewhere in there, they drove. They drove through the baseball complex,
Mm-hmm.
which actually is where Thomas's car was found. But they were near there. I would say at about 5:45, and so they drove through the. There's some duck ponds, the baseball complex, the rodeo grounds. So they had driven through there and then had driven kind of back into town. There's some new apartments down there. So they were kind of on that side of town. And Tucker told me later that he really wanted to drive back through that complex because my oldest son, Tucker, had worked for the City of Canadian 2 summers prior to that. And he said that when they drove through there, he noticed that where Tom's car ended up, that it is normally gated. And he said when they came through there, he noticed that it was not gated. And
Huh.
just something about that kind of, it just caught his eye. And he said that he wanted to drive back through there, but then he said the deputy seemed to be in a hurry, and he had told him that, he had to go off duty pretty soon, and so he really needed to get him home. And so that's why Tucker didn't ask him to drive back through there. If they had, I mean, literally he missed Thomas's car, according to the sheriff, going through there by about 10 minutes.
Okay. All right. Okay, and we're going to get to that later. So by 6 a.m., Tucker is back at home. Deputies dropped him off. You're home. Are all the other people who were searching in cars, are they home?
Yes.
Okay, and the sun would have
It's
probably
my
by that time would have been coming up pretty close to in
Yes.
Canadian Texas.
Yes.
Okay. Would you do later that morning? That would be the next day now. Obviously you're still searching. What went on there? Maybe we should cover this. What did Christian, the girl who was with Thomas the night before, what did she and her father do?
As soon as the sun came up, as it was light, her father has a helicopter, and they went up in the helicopter to see if they could find Thomas's car from the air.
Well, that was convenient. That's bad. That had to be pretty nice. I mean, most searches
Yes.
don't get helicopters, missing
No.
persons cases. Okay, and what did you go out again in your car? Did Tucker go out again after maybe? I mean, I'm sure you couldn't sleep because you were so worried. But just taking a rest, did you go back out, or
Well,
were you
yeah,
playing a waiting game?
I did tell Tucker when he came in. I did tell him. I said you might want to lay down for a little bit. Um, my husband Chris had gone out to check a few places, so he was out looking in one car, and then I also left again to go just drive around, drive by some of his friends' house that I didn't go by earlier. And so Chris and I were both out looking, and then I called Chris because Tucker had said that the deputy told him that the sheriff was going to come on duty at around 7. And so it was probably about 7. I know it was between 7:30 and 8. I had been out looking. My husband had been out, and I said, hey, do you want to meet me at the sheriff's department so we can go, talk to the sheriff together? And so that's what we did. We met. We were in separate cars. We went to the sheriff's department to meet with Sheriff Lewis.
Okay. By this time, had Caleb or Christian explained to you what happened the night before as to
I
what
had
they did or where Thomas's car was parked? Maybe we should cover that very quickly.
Really, I had not really had a chance to talk to them. But I did know when I had talked to Robin earlier and I could hear their conversation, I did know that they, according to Caleb in that conversation, they had left their vehicles in the middle school parking lot. And so they had all met there in their each in a different vehicle. So there were 3 vehicles parked there, but then they had gotten into one of them to go drive around. And so the other 2 had left theirs in that middle school parking lot.
All right. So even though Thomas was out with 2 of his friends, he was not the one who was driving. His vehicle, once again, this Dodge Durango with writing on it, sat at the middle school parking lot, which is kind of right in the center of Canadian Texas, sat there for
Yes,
maybe 3 or 4 hours, something like that.
sure. Yeah.
Okay. So it sat
I think
there.
to my knowledge, yeah. To my
Okay.
knowledge, they drove around in Christian's car.
Right. Okay. Yes. Okay. And so Caleb's car sat there as well. So, and then they came back, and at some point, they all go their separate ways. And we'll get to that when we talk about what we found out Thomas did after that. But so that's so the next morning, Christian and her father, he conveniently has a helicopter, and they are the ones who actually discover Thomas's Durango on the edge of town. And coincidentally, it's where Tucker had said he saw this gate that was opened. Did they fly over that area because of what Tucker said? Did they know about that, or was that just kind of a coincidence?
No, that's just a coincidence. No, they just went up. I believe they flew over the lake, and I'm not sure where else they had flown. And then they just kind of came back across the river. They were kind of flying that way, maybe to fly over the town just to see if they could find a Durango, and that's how they discovered it.
Okay. And it was parked, once again, to the east of these baseball fields, by this water treatment area. I mean, really, I mean, I guess there's a dirt road or something out there, but not someplace that you would have expected Thomas to be in any way. You don't even know if he knew if he'd ever been there
No,
before.
no. And as soon as the sheriff's department called me and told me where Thomas's car was, and it was kind of hidden in a grove of trees, I knew exactly the spot that they were talking about, because when I was in high school, it was a through street. You could drive all the way through there. But I would imagine because of the sewage ponds
Hmm.
being in that area, I'm assuming they have moved around over the years, and so that would have been part of the reason that that road was somewhat closed off. And then there are a couple of people that own some land down in there. So part of it was private, part of it was owned, by the city, which, like I said, I'm assuming that's the reason it had been gated. Was not gated when I was in high school, but I knew immediately where it was at, and really could not imagine Thomas or his friends ever hanging out there.
That's really, I mean, this is not trying to be shady or anything in any way, but it sure is convenient to had a helicopter to find that. I mean, who knows how long the car might not have been found without a
Oh,
helicopter.
exactly. Yes,
I'm
exactly.
just stating that. I'm not here to put any suspicion on Christian or father. I'm not saying that at all, and I don't believe
Sure,
that at all.
sure.
I'm not.
No.
But I guess what we're saying is that truck, the Durango, was pretty well hidden, and you needed something from the air to actually find it.
Yes.
Okay. So they waited there, I'm guessing, until the sheriff showed up. And what happened then?
Um, Shortly after the sheriff's department got to Thomas's car, Sheriff Lewis called my husband and told him that they suspected that Thomas had committed suicide, and asked my husband not to tell me, which of course he did. Um, Not
Hmm.
sure exactly how they came to that conclusion. You know, I don't know. I don't know why that is initially what they said. I don't have any idea.
Okay, but that's what. So the sheriff was making a very quick decision, going out there, seeing the Durango, not seeing Thomas. Of course, was not in it, but he made this very snap judgment in calling your husband. Once again, this is your husband, not Thomas's father. to tell
Yes.
him that possibly Thomas committed suicide.
Yes.
Okay. Did you all drive out there then? I mean, what have you heard about what went on once the sheriff showed up? Did they go in the car? What did they do? Did they look around the area? What happened?
Yeah, we did not go. Like I said earlier, my husband is a fireman. We considered going, but he said they're not going to let you or I or any of us near the car, even though I am a fireman. They're not going to allow me to search, and so we just stayed at the house. And of course, word spread very quickly that Thomas was missing, and so we had people coming to our house, in support, just we showing up at our house. And so we did have people at the house. And so we just kind of stayed there to kind of wait it out. The next day, we did hear that the sheriff's department, had been in the car. At some point during the day, we were told that they were bringing in search dogs. The first dogs were from the associated with the Parks and Wildlife division. Those dogs did not get there, to my recollection, until like mid-afternoon. The deputy, the only female deputy that is on the department, her son and my son were both seniors, and they were good friends. On Friday morning, when she did stop by my house, more so as a mom, and she told me that once Trey, Christian's dad, had called in the where the car was found, that she was the first one to the car. And she said that as the other, the sheriff and the other deputies arrived, she said, I literally stood spread eagle in front of the car, telling them, back away, don't touch the car, stay away from the car, we don't know what's going on. And I'm assuming it's a battle that she very quickly lost, because they all converged on the car. And I think they were in the car, and I don't even know what else.
Okay. I just have to ask you this, and I have to say that I'm a little surprised once you found out where the Durango was that you didn't drive out there yourself.
Like I said, people were at our house,
Mm-hmm.
and I just knew, Chris being the fireman, he just said, they're not going to let us near the car. They're not going to let us down there. And so we just didn't go.
Okay. I only bring this up because a couple weeks ago, in an interview with Melinda Campos, she lost her 18-year-old daughter to a disappearance, coincidentally in Lubbock, Texas. They found her car like 3 days later, and I think Melinda was out there in seconds. I mean, that's an exaggeration. But I'm
Right.
just wondering. In your case, it's just a little bit different. You chose to make a different choice.
Right.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
like I said, I knew they weren't going to let us search. And, and my husband said the same thing, and he wanted to go as well. But we just knew they weren't going to let us anywhere near the car, or
Mm-hmm.
near the area. So we just didn't go.
So this other sheriff, or a deputy, I should say, comes over to your house. This would be the day after Thanksgiving, that Friday,
Yes.
and she told you that she was the first person on the scene. But then other deputies, people, law enforcement officials showed up, and they kind of just overrode her. And they started going through the vehicle. Um, what have you learned about some of the things that were seen in the vehicle once they did open it up?
There was a 25 caliber shell casing. Um, I really can't even tell you where the shell casing was found, because law enforcement has told me one thing and eyewitnesses have told me another. Law
Okay.
enforcement told me it was in the back seat of the car.
Hmm.
An eyewitness who did search by horseback told me that it was in the front seat on the passenger side. Um,
Okay.
so I'm a little uncertain about that. I know that Michael, the other kid that Thomas had hung out with earlier, His debit card was found in the car. Not completely unusual because Michael, I think, loses his debit card a lot. But aside from that, I don't know of anything else that was unusual to the car that any bystander saw.
Okay. But things that were Thomas's that should have been in the car, and we'll get to those things. But there were things missing from the car, items.
Yes.
Okay, and
Yes.
we'll come back to that in a second.
Okay.
But there was a blood drop found in the car.
Yes. Later, we were told that there was a blood droplet on the driver's side door.
All right. Okay, and we'll get back to that in a second too, because these are all going to come up in the rest of the story segment. So they searched the area. Did the dogs pick up any scent of Thomas? Did they go in any particular direction? What did you hear about that?
Oh, one other thing. Somebody
Please.
had urinated, like on the driver's side. I think I'm right about this. Had gotten out like of the driver's side door and walked to
Mm-hmm.
the back of the car and had urinated. Now,
On
when
the
the dogs
ground or
got
on the
there,
vehicle? On the vehicle or on the car?
on
On
the
the ground.
ground, on the
Okay.
ground, yes.
Okay.
Um, the
Hmm.
dogs got there, did not really pick up on any scent at all. To my knowledge, what I was told is that they walked around the car, started up a hill, didn't go very far, and that was it.
And they just kind of faded away. Didn't. And often
Yeah.
in cases like this, you'll see dogs go maybe to the side of a road. They'll be led out to the side of a major road, and then that leading people to believe maybe
Right.
this missing person got picked up by a car. That did not happen in this case.
No.
All right, so essentially the scent died like right in the middle of the woods, out in a field, or something like that.
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's not encouraging. That almost could lead me to believe that maybe the dogs weren't sniffing anything at all, and the listeners know my attitude toward dogs, that we just don't know sometimes what's in their heads.
Right.
But on that day, once again, that Thursday into that Friday, they find the vehicle. Was the writing still on the vehicle? That writing that would have made Thomas's Durango unique, was it still on the vehicle?
Yes, it was.
Okay. So nobody made any attempt to kind of disguise it in any way to make it look like every other Durango out there.
No.
Okay.
No.
All right. So we have a 25 caliber casing. We'll get to that in a moment. But what are you thinking at this point? What's going through your head, especially after that deputy comes over on Friday and maybe gives you more of the story?
Well, and I asked her, even because the car had been returned to me Thursday, the day of Thanksgiving. The car had been returned to me around
That
5,
quickly.
5:30. It was sundown.
That
Yes.
quickly.
And yes.
Hmm.
The other unusual things about the finding of Thomas's car was that the driver's side window was down. Myself and my husband Tucker, his friends Caleb, they were like, Thomas would never leave his window down. Thomas's car was always locked. Thomas's car was found unlocked. His keys were nowhere to be found. And then the car is returned to me. And so as I'm speaking to this female deputy who's at my house, I said, so was the car processed? Like, did you try to lift fingerprints from, inside the car? How has this car been treated? And, I don't know if it's because, maybe she couldn't say. She did say, that they did not try to lift any fingerprints. Didn't understand that. I just really felt like, and had really, since Thomas initially I thought he had an accident, but as time went on, I just felt like something more nefarious had happened because everything was just so unusual.
Yeah.
That's just not how Thomas would do things.
Okay. So you're thinking some maybe foul play is involved, something happened
Yes.
after Christian and Caleb, they parted ways that night
Yes.
before Thanksgiving. Okay, and so once again, you got the car back very quickly. You're not sure if they were ever checked for fingerprints. We talked about this drop of blood. Was it ever proven to be Thomas's, or it was somebody else's? Did they ever check?
According to the sheriff's department, it is Thomas's blood.
Okay. And have you ever seen a picture of it before you got the vehicle back?
I did not see a picture of it.
Okay. Now, the interesting part, though, is you got the vehicle back so fast. What happened to that blood spot that was in the vehicle?
I really don't know, because after I questioned the deputy about, processing the car, the sheriff's department did come back and get it. I think it might have been on Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
They came back and, like I said, there was the key. We only had one key to the car. And so they did come back and get the car. And then that was when I was told about the blood droplet.
So you didn't find it. She didn't tell you about it on Friday. You didn't find out about it till days after that.
Right.
Okay. But then when you got the car back, you didn't see that blood droplet in the car, did you?
No.
All right. What is your belief regarding the blood droplet that was in the car?
I don't know. I mean,
do you think that it was wiped off? Do you think it was did you think it was wiped away before you got it back?
Yes,
okay.
I think it was. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Was the .25 caliber casing still in the vehicle when you got it back?
No, it was not.
Okay. All right. I did not realize, I have to admit, I did not know that you got the vehicle back that fast. So within like 10 hours of it being discovered, it was already back in your possession.
Yes.
I did not know that. Okay. Now, sometime later, I believe this was a couple months later, some of Thomas's things were found. What was found and where were they found?
Yes, about 2 months later, Thomas's backpack was found on Lake Marvin Road, in a pretty secluded area that probably only oil field workers go down. A guy who worked for the electrical company is actually the one who found the backpack. It was inside the gate. It was actually found on, I guess that would be state land, federal land. I'm not really state land, I guess. And the guy who manages that land, who lives like a quarter of a mile away from it, was never notified that the backpack was found there on that wildlife reserve. The guy from the electrical company, we had a really bad ice storm. They had been out fixing, power lines, and he's the one who discovered it. When I asked, Sheriff Lewis did not tell me about the discovery until 5 days after he had possession of it.
Okay.
Not really sure why.
Okay. In relation to where the vehicle was found, where were these things? How close?
It was across the river from where Thomas's car was found. Maybe a couple of miles across the river. Lewis had told myself and my ex-husband, several times that Thomas had walked away. He felt like Thomas had walked across the river and then he dumped his backpack. My son is not outdoorsy. There's no way he would have walked across the river. It's very brushy. It just wouldn't happen.
Okay. And among these items, was his laptop there?
Yes, his school issue laptop was in the backpack.
Okay. What was the overall condition of all these things when they were found?
They were wet. The laptop essentially was ruined. All of his papers were wet. According to the sheriff's department, it had sat there long enough that They said that some of the papers were moldy or getting moldy. I have no idea because I did not ever get to see the backpack until almost a year later.
And what did it look like to you when you finally saw it?
It was dirty. Obviously, it had set out in the weather. Of course, at that point, the papers had dried. I personally did not see mold on the papers, but the papers were wet. They had gotten wet. Some of the writing was not, had come off the papers. But it was definitely Thomas's backpack.
Okay. Because I have read in some reports that it seemed like those things couldn't have been out there that long. Of course, that might buy into something else we're eventually going to get into.
Sure.
But in your opinion, does it look like the laptop, for example, was out in the elements for 2 months?
I never got to see the laptop.
You never got to see it, not to even to this day.
No, I've never seen the laptop.
They've never returned it to you?
No, it's not mine. I mean, it should have been returned to the school.
Okay.
But to my knowledge, I have never seen it, but to my knowledge, our school officials have never seen the laptop either.
Do you believe that it's still in the possession of the sheriff's department?
It was sent to a crime lab, so I would guess they still have possession of it. I really don't know.
Okay, so that's something that's still up in the air. All right.
Yeah.
Was there a gun holster found somewhere in relation to this case?
There was a gun holster found on October 14th, 2017, in a search conducted by my private investigator, Philip Klein.
Mm-hmm.
He's the one who put the search on.
Okay, so this happened much later. This gun holster was not found at the same time that the backpack and the laptop were. This was some time later. Okay, and was this gun holster found near the car or near these other things?
It was found on the same road as the backpack, but several miles up the road.
Okay. Was Thomas's, and once again, since he, of course, disappeared, was his cell phone ever found?
His cell phone was also found that day in that search.
In the search by your private investigator, or was it with the backpack? Was it with the vehicle, or was it with found by your private investigator?
It was by the private investigator. The same day, it was October 14th, the day that he had put on a big search for that in that area.
Okay. I want to come back. So let's just cover this now. Was the cell phone locked? Could you look at it? Are you sure it's Thomas's?
I never got to see the cell phone when it was found. I have never seen the cell phone. There is some discrepancies regarding the cell phone. The person who found the cell phone, who is not from Canadian, does not live here. She was from a neighboring community, wanted to help. I've never met this lady. I don't know her at all.
Yeah.
She does have some family here, but I don't know this person. She's the one who found the cell phone about less than 10 minutes into the search. She, of course, they were told not to, touch, anything that they found and or photograph. And she did not touch the cell phone, but she did photograph it. She said that while they were waiting for Mr. Klein's team and the sheriff's department to arrive and, bag the phone or whatever they needed to do, she said that to the group, she made the comment, hey, that phone is rose gold. I don't think that, a teenage boy would have a rose gold phone. Thomas's phone was not rose gold. Thomas's phone was gold.
Okay. So once again, just point blank, do you believe that that is Thomas's phone?
I am told that the phone at the lab is Thomas's phone. I'm not convinced that that's the phone that was found the day of the search.
All right, we're going to have to come back to that. That's probably going to leave. We have so much more to cover in this case because it's very complex. But
Yep.
we're going to come back. We're going to talk about your private investigator. Maybe that would be a more better time to come back to that particular topic. What we're
Okay.
just going to say for now is that the topic of the cell phone is a little up in the air, and
Yes.
we'll come back to it. Okay. When you talked to Christian and Caleb, finally, did they have any ideas as to what could have happened?
None. They, even to this day, I just don't think that they don't, when they parted ways, about 11:20 on Thanksgiving evening, um, they all had plans to meet and hang out later on Thanksgiving Day after, we'd all kind of done our family stuff. Christian and Caleb and Thomas wanted to meet and hang out. The two girls that Thomas had hung out with earlier in the day on that Wednesday before, he also had plans to go with them to the movie on Friday night. So, Thomas wasn't, in my mind, he was coming home at 11:20. In his mind, he was getting gas and coming home.
All right, let's talk about that. You eventually found out, maybe shortly after this, that because of your credit card records, that after these three parted ways at the middle school parking lot, that Thomas ended up going to Frank's, which is a gas station on the main drag in Canadian Texas. What time did that happen?
He went to Frank's, I would say, as soon as he left the parking lot, and my card was swiped at Frank's at 11:28.
All right, 11:28. And do you remember how much gas that he got? Do you remember the dollar amount? In just a range of
Mhm.
what it was.
Yeah, I think it was around $45, which tells me he was out of gas and he was filling up all the way.
Okay. So you believe he filled the Durango up. Durango's going to have a decently large gas tank. And I actually have gone back and found out what the gas prices were in Texas at that time. They were about $1.90, which is a pretty nice price.
Yeah.
$1.90 in Canadian Texas at the time. So yes, I would believe that he did fill it up. Now, how much gas was in the tank when you got the vehicle back?
A quarter of a tank had been used, so there was 3/4 of a tank of gas in his car when I got it back.
Wow. Just so the listeners know, I did a calculation on that. And the Durango has a 24-gallon fuel tank, which means 18 gallons were left when Penny got the vehicle back. That means, using miles per gallon for a Durango, about 100 miles were driven or it was sitting idling somewhere all night. A combination of both. The Durango was driven about 100 miles between Thomas getting gas at Frank's and it being discovered 8 hours later.
Right.
And we have to remember how many people were driving all over Canadian Texas looking for that vehicle. 5, 6, 7
About,
people.
yeah. Yeah.
And it was never seen. Very, very interesting. One more thing before we get into the rest of the story was Thomas's cell phone. I know you told the listeners that his phone was turned off shortly after midnight. You were trying to text him. Tucker was trying to text him. Was there any pinging of his phone before that in any particular area of Canadian Texas?
According to the sheriff's department, they claim that there was a ping near the high school football stadium.
Okay, and what time do they say that happened?
The sheriff's department?
Yes, what time do they say that ping happened?
Oh gosh, around 12, I guess around midnight.
Okay, so we're to believe that the last place, if we're to believe this, is that Thomas was in the area of the football stadium, which is on the other side of your house. He would have, to go from Frank's to the football stadium, he would have probably had to come close to your house, the way I look at the map of Canadian Texas. And then shortly after that, his phone got turned off for some reason, and that was when you were trying to text him, when Tucker was trying to text him. Okay?
Yes.
Okay. Let's go to the rest of the story, and this is where it gets even more a little complicated, listeners. After this all happened, there was a series of videos that were collected. Some places had them, some places didn't have them. What can you tell me about? You personally went to a bunch of businesses looking for videos, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
Okay, where did you go
Um,
in town?
I went to the dollar store. I had talked to the secretary at the First United Methodist Church. Um, I had talked to the owner of the Pit Stop and Abraham Trading, the owner of Abraham
Mm-hmm.
Trading, and I think that was about it.
Okay, let's take those one by one. Were you able to get any video from Frank's gas station?
No, it was not.
Okay. Were you, is it because they don't have a camera or it already been taped over by that time? What was the case there?
Theirs was down. It was not working the night that Thomas disappeared.
Okay. You went to the dollar store, which is next door to the gas station. Did they have any video that could be helpful?
They had video that would have been helpful as long as Thomas was driving on that side of the road. So nearest the dollar store.
Okay. And did you get to see any of that video? Did it tell you anything?
I did not get to see it. It had already been taped over.
Okay. And how many days, weeks, months after Thomas disappeared did you do this?
About 6 months.
6 months later. Okay. And are you to believe that the police did not do anything like this?
They collected video from the dollar store and from one of the Allsups, but I don't know if they collected from both Allsups or only one.
Mm-hmm.
They collected from Alexander's Grocery and Deli and Abraham Trading
Okay.
and the Pavilion where Thomas's car was seen driving to its final destination.
Okay. So they did a decent amount, maybe, of work of trying to track down some video, you could say.
Yeah.
You could say.
Yeah.
You had mentioned this church. Actually, you didn't get to see that video, but a woman who works at the church saw the video. What did she say was seen on the video?
She told me that she saw 3 cars leaving the parking lot. She said one turned to the right, one went straight, and one turned to the left.
Hmm. And this is a church. Which church is this in Canadian?
The Methodist Church.
Okay, and it's not like right next to the parking lot. It's well down the street, but being that what she told you was that the trees, when the leaves fall in November, the video can see the whole way down to the middle school parking lot. And around 11:20, Caleb, it shows 3 cars leaving the parking lot in a
Yes.
spread of a few minutes.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
and one of those you believe is Thomas going to Frank's to the gas station.
Yes.
Okay, and Caleb and Christian, they go off in separate directions. So their story of leaving the parking lot 11:20 or something like that, according to that video, is true.
Yes, and that was also confirmed by school officials because they also viewed the cameras from the school.
Okay, and have you ever seen that video?
I've not seen that video.
Okay. Let's talk about this Abraham's video. Now, here's where things get. This is where I think we're going to depart from the popular stories that are out there. I think because Penny, the listener should know, was very nice in sending me a copy of the videos, all the videos taken from Abraham's, which is at the corner of Main Street and 2nd Street in Canadian, Texas, and I've watched all of it. In my opinion, this is the video. If you ever watch the Crime Watch Daily Show, this is the video that was used from Abraham's. In my opinion, there is no way to tell whether Thomas's Durango went through that intersection or not. We've talked about this, haven't we, Penny?
Hmm. Yes, and I agree with that.
I believe that Crime Watch Daily has misled people in believing that one picture of a red SUV going past the camera is Thomas's. I cannot say that more forcefully than this. In
Right.
fact, in me watching the entire video, what I told you, Penny, is that there are about 12 red SUVs that passed those cameras during the course of that night. And none of them
Right.
have writing on them. Some of them might be Durangos, some of them might be Explorers, some of them might be, GMC Terrains. It's just so hard to tell. And
Exactly.
all right, and we also have to remember that at the same time that Crime Watch Daily and other people have said, well, this red SUV is just driving all over Canadian Texas aimlessly, there were like 7 different people out looking for him, and none of them saw one red SUV at all.
Exactly. I agree.
So it's listeners, I'm telling you, I think that Crime Watch Daily does a good job in getting word out about some of these crimes and disappearances and things. But that was a total. I don't know if it's a lie, but it's a little bit of sensationalism on their part. I'm telling you, I've seen the video.
Yes.
You cannot pick out his vehicle. It may be his vehicle. We just don't know. We just cannot say. I find it hard to believe that all these people are out looking for Thomas's Durango and none of them see him. I still hold to that. Now, having spoken about this Abrahams video, and people can find it on a map. Once again, it's at the corner of 2nd Street and Main Street in Canadian. How did you even get that video?
The owner of Abraham Trading is a classmate of mine from high school, and we've remained friends all these years. He's a really nice guy. He's a really smart guy, and he had saved the video. And, upon hearing, the sheriff talk about and say, how Thomas's car was just, all over town that night, which without having seen video, I myself found a little unbelievable, like we said earlier, due to the amount of people who were looking.
Yeah.
And so I called the owner of Abraham Trading, and I asked if I could have the video, which they were happy to give to me. He had also watched his own video. He had made notes. Like you, he could not tell if, the cars, were Thomas's or were a Durango. He had made some notes, it said possibly, red car, just some things like that.
Sure.
But, and I know, I'm not really sure he knew exactly what kind of car he was looking for either, but he had watched his own video and had made some notes. Then upon giving it to me, I also watched it. I have viewed the entire thing, and I agree with you. I could not ever conclusively say that I felt like Thomas's car is ever seen on the Abraham Trading video.
Right. Once again, the listeners need to understand that there are red trucks with maybe caps on, pickup trucks with caps on them, red vehicles, red SUV type vehicles that go through that intersection during the course of the night. I'm not saying there's not, but there is no way to tell whether it is Thomas's vehicle or some other vehicle. In fact, I'm inclined to believe that none of them are his vehicle, because when you finally did get the vehicle back, it still had that white writing on it, which surely would have stuck out on a video, on the videos that I saw, at least on one of the angles of the videos.
Yes, and I agree with that as well.
And before your listeners like, well, how do you know that they're red? Well, what is not maybe totally known out there is that there were actually 6 different cameras at Abraham's, 3 of them for the inside, 3 of them for the outside, and they all are on the same file. And you can click, the listeners should understand, you can click from one to the other. 3 of those cameras are pointing at the outside of the building. All of them show 2nd Street, and 2 of them show the intersection of 2nd Street and Main Street, and one of them just happens to be in color. So it's very convenient. So you can tell the
Yeah.
different colors of vehicles that go through the intersection. And like I said, I've watched it all like 8 hours of it. And we're going to come back to that.
Hmm.
But if there was ever a video that would have shown Thomas's vehicle, it would have been that one once again, because it's Main Street and Second Street. You know, you have two stoplights. Well, that's one of the intersections that has a stoplight in Canadian. We're going to come back to that video here in a bit because it told us quite a bit later. You got to see
Right.
a video from Alexander's. Now, this is one where you do believe it is Thomas's vehicle. Tell the listeners about that when you got to see it.
There is a video from a convenience store in town called Alexander's Grocery and Deli. I have seen the video. That I believe that car is Thomas's car. It is not in color, but I do believe that it is Thomas's car because it goes by twice within 2 minutes of each other, and you can see the writing on the windows.
And what time would this have been that this happened?
It was about 5:45 a.m.
5:45 a.m. Texas time. So just to put this in the timeline, this would have been right around the time that Tucker was riding around with Pine Gregory, the deputy.
Yes.
Okay. And is this Alexander's close to your house?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
It's about 6 blocks maybe from my house.
Okay. And the police have seen this video. So the vehicle goes off in one direction, and then like a minute later, 2 minutes later, it comes back the other direction. And what did the police say to you about this particular video? What was their opinion on it?
Their opinion on the video was that Thomas was leaving town. He had been thinking about leaving town all night. He had been driving around town thinking about leaving town all night. He just couldn't decide. And so he drove up to the house, was still a bit indecisive, decided, hey, I'm going to go ahead and go, potentially came to see the house one last time before he decided that he was leaving town.
And so he goes past this Alexander's. Would this have been the road that he would have been on to go to your house? Possibly.
Yes, you could. Yeah,
Okay.
very easily.
Okay. And so you saw this video that's what the police tell you. Now, we should know that it wasn't long after that seemingly the Durango is totally across town at the ball fields, because we have a video have you ever seen this video from the treatment plant?
No, I have not.
Okay. So are you under the belief that only the police have seen this video?
To my knowledge, they're the only ones that have seen it.
Okay. And what does this video at the ball field show, and what time allegedly was this video taken?
They told me at approximately 5:55 a.m., Thomas's car heads down by the water treatment plant and into this little road that goes into these grove of trees.
Mm-hmm. And that's where the Durango was finally found. Now, what's interesting about this is that the Alexanders, where you got to see the video, and where this treatment plant are on totally opposite sides of town. There's a couple different roads, streets that you could take there, but one of them could be by the Abrahams video, once again, that I got to see. I did not see Thomas's vehicle go through the intersection at that time, and I don't think you did either, so it must have gone some different way. Were there any other vehicles pulling into the treatment plant with the Durango that morning that you know of?
According to Lewis, there were not.
Okay, so the Durango was by itself.
Yes.
Okay. And once again, though, the police are the only ones that have been able that have showed you this video. They showed you the Alexander video, but they didn't show you the baseball field / treatment plant video.
No.
All right, so if we're to put this in the timeline, is that Durango is up by Alexander's. Allegedly, he's thinking about going home. He changes his mind. Instead, he chooses to go down to the treatment plant. Would it take about 10 minutes to get down there? Maybe. maybe. Just me looking at it
Possibly. Yeah.
from Google. So there's that. So maybe that fits in the timeline. Maybe the reasoning is somewhat uh, thin, but that's what we have regarding the video. Just to go over this again, the Abraham's video, in my opinion, looking at it for several hours, is that Thomas's vehicle cannot be discerned on it. I'm not saying it's not on there. It's just it can't be easily picked out. There are several red SUVs going through there. Couldn't get video from the gas
Exactly.
station. Couldn't get any helpful video from the dollar store. You had a friend of yours who saw a video from the church showing Christian, Caleb, and Thomas leaving the parking lot. You got to see the Alexander's video. The police let you see that, but they didn't let you see the treatment plant video. Okay.
No.
I just want to sum that all up, and we're going to talk about it again. That I believe the Crime Watch Daily program misled its viewers on this whole video topic. I'm going to continue to
Sure.
say that, and we've talked about that off in private. Okay, so any actual sightings of there is actually one actual sighting of Thomas that maybe we believe after he left the middle school parking lot. Why don't you talk about that?
So I think it was either on Friday or Saturday after Thomas went missing. Three boys, two from the high school and one from middle school, came to my house. One of them is also my cousin. But the one boy, and he was in Thomas's grade, would have graduated together. He told me they had been out searching. These three young men had been out searching by foot for their friend and cousin Thomas. So the one boy says that he saw Thomas filling up his Durango with gas at Frank's. He told me the time was about 11:40, and he said normally I would have pulled in behind him and followed him. He said, I know Thomas's curfew is midnight. So he said, I just would have followed him around for a little while, and they probably would have texted or, talked on the phone or whatever. But he just said, I didn't. And I could tell he felt really bad about not doing that.
Okay, why did he ever give any reason for not stopping in to see Thomas while he was getting gas? I mean,
he really didn't give a reason. He just said that he didn't.
Okay. And do you believe that he was heading north or south when he passed Thomas pumping gas at Frank's?
I believe he was headed south.
Okay. And do you know what kind of vehicle he might have been driving that night?
I know he drove a pickup truck. I believe it was black. I know it was a dark color, and it was one of those trucks that was kind of lifted up off the ground, like higher off the ground.
Okay. Now, see, that is interesting because going back to the Abraham's video, now people should understand that once you look at a map, and I urge everyone to go to Google and look at this, Abraham's is approximately maybe not even a half mile north of Frank's.
Exactly.
And at approximately 11:30, I don't have the exact time written down, there is a black big pickup truck that looks to be lifted that does go past Abraham's video in the direction of Frank's around 11:30. So the kid's story is conceivable that might be him. We don't know.
Sure.
I don't think he's ever been shown the video, but to verify if that's his truck or not. But his story is conceivable that because there is a black pickup truck that is headed in Frank's direction around the time that this kid said he went by Frank's. So,
yes.
Okay. But the issue is that at some point after that, I'm guessing, you've told me, that this kid changed his story. Can you explain that?
Yes. I really can't. I have a friend who is an attorney who came to Canadian, just wanted to, visit and look around. And she also wanted to talk to several of Thomas's friends. And so we rounded some of them up, and he was one of them. and I had told her that he had told me he saw Thomas getting gas. And when she asked him about it, he said, "Oh no, it wasn't me. It was these other two boys." Um, so yeah, I'm not really sure why he changed his story. I also, went back and I asked my husband. I said, "Isn't this what he said?" And he said, "Yeah, I was standing there when when those three boys came over. I was standing there, and that's what he said. He said, I drove by. I saw him around 11:40. He was getting gas." So now
Okay.
I'm very unsure why he changed his story.
Okay, and when he said that he saw him getting gas, was this before or after you knew that Thomas had stopped and gotten gas when you checked your credit card statement?
I knew that he had gotten gas. At that point, I didn't know what time because it takes a little while, for the bank to pull that information.
Mm-hmm.
I, up to that point, I didn't know if he had gotten gas right after he left my house or if he had gotten it later. I assumed he had gotten it later because that's typically what he does. And so that did confirm that he had gotten gas later in the evening.
I just think it's important to, verify. It could be that this kid was just making up a story, having already heard that Thomas got gas. But your
Right.
impression is that maybe he knew independently that Thomas was getting gas because, once again, he saw it himself.
Yeah, I believe that he saw it. Like I said,
Okay.
I don't know why he changed the story, but I do believe that he was being truthful. A day or two into it, I don't know why he would have been untruthful to me that day. So
Okay.
I'm not really sure what's going on.
Okay, that's something that's still unresolved, and maybe that's something maybe you need to follow up on at some point.
Right.
Okay. All right. Now we're probably going to talk about one of the first controversial points of this whole story, and it's not something that I don't think this was covered in the Crime Watch Daily. I don't think you're going to find this anywhere. But early on, I don't know how early on, but you claim that you actually saw a picture taken of Thomas pumping gas.
Yes, I did.
And okay, when did this happen, and who showed it to you?
Okay, so about 10 days, I would say, after Thomas went missing, I was shown a picture of Thomas at Frank's getting gas. And I was shown that picture by Sheriff Lewis. I just remember at the time when he showed me the picture that to me it was just further confirmation that he got gas at Frank's that night.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember saying to Sheriff Lewis, "Yes, that is Thomas. Those are the clothes he was wearing when he left my house. That is his car. I could see the back of his car. I mean, I could tell that it was a Durango. I just knew it was his car. Yeah, I could also see the writing on the back window.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously Thomas in the picture, and Thomas was clearly pumping gas."
Okay, now the key point to all of this is where it gets very controversial, people, is that you do not believe, from what you saw, it does not look like this picture was taken from a video camera, meaning suspended like 20 to 30 feet in the air. Your opinion upon seeing this picture is that it was actually taken from ground level.
Yes.
As if maybe from, I'm just going to put it out there, the dash cam of a car.
It's possible, yes.
Oh, okay, it's possible. But just to be clear, dash cam photos usually show like windshield wipers at the bottom of the screen or a hood or something. You don't remember that in this photo.
I don't remember seeing that in the photo, but it was at ground level. Whoever took the picture was pretty much directly behind Thomas and Thomas's vehicle, very close up. So it wasn't taken from a surveillance camera that was way behind. The day that I was shown the picture, Sheriff Lewis also told me that picture came from Dollar General, which I thought was very odd because I just kept thinking when he said that in my mind, why would Dollar General have a picture or a view of the gas station next door? I mean, it just didn't seem I mean, you know, typically your own surveillance camera is going to surveil what you own, not what somebody else has.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just kind of didn't make sense to me. But then I just thought, I kind of dismissed it because I thought, well, it's early on. So maybe Sheriff Lewis misspoke. And he really means that it came from Franck's.
Mm-hmm.
And, but that just clicked in my mind that he said that it came from the business next door.
Okay. And this was also, though, would not explain how the picture could be taken from ground level.
Exactly.
I mean, in this day and age, as many YouTube videos and everything, we know what surveillance video looks like. It's suspended high up, whether it's in, you know, at a Walmart or, you know, a convenience store or something. We all know in the 21st century what surveillance video looks like. It's high up,
Exactly.
looking down on people. This was not that kind of picture.
Right.
Okay. And in
I'm not
fact,
the only person. Go ahead.
what I was going to say is, in fact, I collected a variety of pictures of people pumping gas online and sent them to you. And the one you picked out of the 5 was one that was taken from about 50 feet away from ground level directly behind a person's car. That is the one that you say most resembled what you saw.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. Well, that is certainly something. Now, did anybody else besides you and Sheriff Lewis see this picture?
My private investigator, Philip Klein, saw the picture, and it was reported in the Houston Chronicles.
All right. Okay. And this was, like you said, about 10 minutes or 10 days after Thomas disappeared.
Yes.
Now, so this is very suspicious. I mean, this could lead us to believe, I mean, I'm sure some people are thinking right at this point, but when you went back and asked Sheriff Lewis about that picture later, what did he say?
Well, I didn't ask Sheriff Lewis.
Okay.
Actually, my husband was talking to, because there's some discrepancy over the Texas Ranger who was investigating the case. Sheriff Lewis told me initially that the Rangers could not be pulled in. They would not pull them in. It was not criminal. And then I'm told later that the Rangers were on the case on day one. I have no idea what the truth is on that either.
Mm-hmm.
My husband was talking to the major who is over the Ranger who was supposed to be assisting or working on this case. They're talking on the phone one day, and I don't know what brought it up, but my husband said to him, what about this picture that my wife was shown, you know, of Thomas getting gas? I did not see the picture, but she saw it. She described it to me. And he was very alarmed by it because he said he had never heard about that. And that was about 9 months after Thomas went missing. And he said, well, I've never heard of that. So they get off the phone. He immediately called, you know, the field ranger, asked him about it. He picks up the phone, calls the sheriff's department. I believe he talked to the chief assistant deputy who said, you know, we don't know what she's talking about. There's not a picture like that. We just don't know what she's talking about. That picture does not exist.
And that was 9 months after Thomas went missing. So approximately that's like 6 months ago.
Yes.
Maybe longer than that ago,
Yeah.
that this all happened.
Yes.
Um, that's pretty significant evidence that somebody would
Mm-hmm.
take a picture of Thomas pumping gas that night and then that picture disappear. And
Right.
it doesn't. You don't have to be a missing persons expert to determine that. Well, there are only certain kinds of cars out there that have cameras pointing out their windshields all the time, and of course, police cars are the first ones that come to mind.
Exactly.
Okay, we just have to be honest about this. Maybe it was a picture that we just don't know. Is Thomas looking at far as you remember? Is Thomas looking at the camera, or is his head turned away from the camera?
I don't remember him looking directly at the camera, but I could definitely see the side of his face.
Okay. And so once again, Sheriff Lewis, when he showed you the picture, he told you that it came from the Dollar General store next door.
Yes.
And whereas when you went to the Dollar General store, you said that they said that they had no helpful video information.
In fact, they let me look at their monitors
Mm-hmm.
or at their monitor with their views, and
Yeah.
no, there was no view of Franck.
All right. There is no way that one of their cameras, at least the way you ended up seeing them, that they could have taken that picture.
No.
Especially considering that you say that the picture was taken from like 50 feet away, directly
Yes.
behind, at ground level, which, once again, doesn't
Yes.
seem possible. All
Right.
right. Very, very, and that's something that's still not resolved to this point in 2018.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
All right. Okay. So we'll move on to a couple of other things. You got the Durango back. The 25 caliber casing was not in it. Did Thomas ever own a gun? Was he ever known to shoot guns? Do you have a 25 caliber in your family?
No. Thomas does not shoot guns. He doesn't like guns. Um, he would not go shooting with his friends that do like to do that.
Mm-hmm.
My family does not own a 25 caliber. I have no idea where that came from.
Okay. And I mean, this is a fairly obvious question, but I have to ask: any holes in the Durango that you saw when you got it back? They in the floorboards, maybe somewhere that the police might have missed.
No holes inside or out of the car.
All right. And once again, we already covered the blood splatter, this little drop of blood, I should say, that when you got it back, it had been wiped off, which I now understand is not usual police procedure for something
Right.
like that, which I'm not sure what to make of that. And so those are some of the things. Do you still have the Durango?
I do. It is
Okay.
in my possession.
Okay. When you got it back, is there anything else that maybe seemed out of place to you that maybe the cops would not recognize, being that you knew your son so well and they didn't?
No, there was nothing else out of place. Nothing that I thought was odd or unusual,
Okay.
except that his phone charger was in the car.
Okay, that's
I
unusual.
would think if you're gonna run away, I would think you would take a phone charger.
Okay. All right. Let's
Just
talk
my guess,
about
but
okay. Let's talk about Thomas's girlfriend. We have to remember that they broke up not shortly before he disappeared. Was she in Canadian Texas that night?
she was.
All right.
She was.
Now, my understanding, I'm not sure about this. You're going to have to clarify this for me. Did she text Thomas or did he text her that night after he split ways with Caleb and Christian? Who texted who first?
Sage texted him.
First. Just to be clear about
Yes.
that, because I've read it other places, other news articles, that he texted her first and then she replied. Just making
Right.
sure.
No, I believe. Yeah.
Just making sure.
She texted him.
Okay.
hmm
And what time did she text him, do you believe?
I believe it was like 11:30 the first time she texted him.
Mm-hmm.
11:30, 11:35.
Okay. And did he respond?
Yes.
He did. And then it was the second, then she texted him back?
Yes.
And what happened that
And there
time?
was no response.
Okay. Um, so just like when you were trying to text him later, of course, 20 minutes later, 25 minutes later, you and Tucker, you got no response. She was already getting no response at approximately 20 to midnight. Approximately.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is right around the time that she was texting Thomas is right about the time he was disappearing for whatever reason.
Exactly.
Has Sage ever personally told you what the content of the texts were?
Sage did not, but her mom did. Um, she said that Sage had sent a text message saying, "Hey, are you okay?" To which Thomas responded, "Yes, I believe." And then she sent him another text message. I'm not sure what the second one was, but he did not respond to it.
Okay. Have the police ever looked at these texts? Her mother obviously has seen these texts, but you've never seen them. Not to just, I just have to be blunt about this, but all we have is Sage's word regarding what the content of the texts were.
No, I believe that the sheriff's department and I believe that all the investigators have seen those text messages,
Okay.
to
Did
my
she ever?
knowledge.
Okay. My understanding is that she and Thomas had not been in touch at all that day or into that evening. Um, did she ever give any reason why she just suddenly out of the blue at 11:30 on a Wednesday night suddenly decided to text him?
Well, and this is what her mother told me is that because they had the night before and had spoken, and to my knowledge had not had any communication on that Wednesday. And so her mom told me that she asked her, what prompted you to text him, at that time?
Mm-hmm.
And Sage just said that she had gotten this really odd feeling that something wasn't right or that something was possibly wrong. And so she just sent him a text message to check on him.
Not sure coincidental. I mean, I don't know. We don't. If we knew what happened in Thomas's case, we could just go solve it right now.
Sure.
But it is a little coincidental that she's texting him right around the time that he's disappearing. Could
Yes.
just be, and in fact, we're going to get into another coincidence here in a bit. But so I just need to ask you this and I've asked you this before, but if I could,
Mm-hmm.
is there any possibility that Thomas got a text from Sage and they might have arranged to meet somewhere, and would he blow off his curfew for that?
Um, I think that if he had decided, if she had wanted to meet, I think Thomas would have texted me and said, hey, or called me and said, hey, Sage wants to talk. I'm going to go talk to her. Can I stay out a little bit later? To which I
Mhm.
probably would have said yes.
Right. And maybe just so we can get an idea of the family dynamic. Um, if generally, just in general, Thomas doesn't get home by midnight curfew on a night, what kind of penalty would he have gotten? What would be the penalty
Um,
for that?
he may have possibly been grounded from his Xbox for a while.
Okay.
I don't really, honestly, I don't really know. That's probably what I would have done, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't know because Thomas he had literally never missed curfew.
Okay. All right. So, but on the other hand, we know how teenage passions can run. And,
Sure,
we don't know what, once again, if we knew what happened, we could just go solve it right now. But,
sure,
10 days before he goes missing, they break up. It seems like a good breakup, but, sometimes people regret these things, and who knows what people, especially young people are holding inside them. We
sure.
just don't know. And being that she
Yeah,
was in the area of Canadian that night, it's something that maybe we'll have to keep our mind open to. Now, of course, that is going to pale in comparison to what we're going to talk about now. And we've already touched upon it with the picture that you saw that then seemingly kind of disappeared, and now nobody wants to talk about it or doesn't know about it. And that is Sheriff
exactly.
Lewis himself.
Yeah.
Um, this is a touchy. I even have it in my notes. This is very touchy territory. And there's a lot of things we could talk about regarding this topic, but we're going to stick to just the things that we know about, that you or Thomas has experienced, and we're going to let the listeners make their own decision. What do you know? Sheriff Lewis, he actually is originally from Canadian, Texas. Why don't you just give him a general idea of how he even became sheriff?
Okay, so he is originally from Canadian. His family has lived here for a long time, and he has worked in some other counties, and he moved to Canadian in I'm gonna say 2000 the maybe well I'm gonna say 2015. maybe the end of 2014, and decides that he's going to run for sheriff. And he's in his early 30s. Um, so he makes this run for sheriff. The sitting sheriff had been appointed by our county commissioners because our former sheriff had passed away while he was in office.
Mm-hmm.
So they appoint a sheriff. To my knowledge, the sheriff, the the sheriff before Sheriff Lewis, I had absolutely no problems with him. I'm not a lawbreaker. I don't have tons of contact with law enforcement, but to my knowledge, he did a good job. I thought that he did a good job, the things that I saw. Um, so I'm not really sure. I know there were some people that really didn't care for him. I don't know if it was just because Lewis was running, he was a hometown boy, and so that's, I have no idea.
Mm-hmm.
There were a handful of people that I think really didn't care for Sheriff Pearson.
Okay. Okay. And so they had this election, but the other guy kind of, you gave the impression that kind of essentially dropped out. I mean, he
Yes, and I had talked to Sheriff Pearson.
mm-hmm.
He's just not a politician, and when he was appointed, um, he had the most experience of everyone on the sheriff's department, is my understanding, and so that's why he got appointed. Um, he really just didn't have it in him to. I don't think he just wasn't a politician. He didn't want to get dirty and do some of those things that happen in elections. He didn't have a stomach for it.
Okay. So Sheriff Lewis, though, comes in once again, not kind of a carpetbagger. He's originally from the area. He went actually to Canadian high school. He won by 25 votes, which sounds like a close election. I don't know how many people total voted though, but that sounds close to me. Um, However, we just need to say this: he won despite there being rumors of maybe misdeeds and things in these other places where he had been a deputy.
Right.
Okay, but we cannot. You or I've at least not been able to substantiate anything. It may be just rumors. It may be just people with an axe to grind. Nothing that appeared in any paper or anything else. This what I'm
Sure.
saying is um those things were out there. People in Canadian Texas, the county, still decided to vote for Sheriff Lewis, and he became the sheriff.
Sure.
Okay, and how long he been sheriff before Thomas disappeared?
He had been sheriff for about 2 months. The Everybody who now normally he would not have taken office until January. He ended up taking office in September, so about 4 months before he normally would have. But the sitting sheriff and his entire department, when he lost the election, they all left. They went and found jobs elsewhere, and they all cleared out, including the administrative assistant. Some of the dispatchers, I think, stayed behind, but all of the deputies and the administrative assistant left.
Okay, this includes Pearson, by the way, the guy who was running against him.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
So once they found out that Lewis won, was this a factor of nobody wanting to work for Lewis, in your opinion?
Nobody that was on that sheriff's department wanted to work for Lewis.
All right. Could it be because of the reputation he had gained from somewhere else, or what do you think? What have you heard?
I believe, I think it's maybe had some to do with his reputation from some other places, and also that he was very young and inexperienced.
Okay. Now we should note something else. Sheriff Lewis and your ex-husband know each other?
Yes.
How do they know each other? Because I would anticipate that your
Um,
ex-husband would be quite a bit older than Lewis is.
yes. Yes, he is about probably 30 years older than him.
Okay.
He Sheriff Lewis was formerly a city policeman and a deputy in Perryton, Texas, which is Ochiltree County, and that is where my ex-husband lives. And I can't tell you how they became friends. I just know, according to my ex-husband, they were friends. Apparently, they played fantasy football in a fantasy football league, and Lewis and my ex-husband were partners.
Is that right? So they must have known each other fairly well.
Yes.
And when did you find this out?
When Lewis moved back to Canadian.
All right. So before he became sheriff?
Yes.
Okay. So if I may ask, did you vote for Sheriff Lewis, or did you not take part, if I may ask, being that you knew that your ex-husband was friends with him?
I did vote, and I did not vote for Sheriff Lewis.
Okay. All right. So, but maybe thinking that Lewis is going to be the sheriff, your ex-husband's friends with him, you can't be upset about that. I mean, you know your ex-husband, and you got this sheriff that's, hey, almost part of your family, being that your ex-husband has known him for a while.
Right.
Okay, now,
right.
But that's not how things went. I mean, in fact, things started happening well before this. A year and about 5 months before Thomas disappeared, well before Lewis ever became sheriff, your son Thomas and Lewis, who was a deputy, I'm guessing, in another jurisdiction, they had a run-in in Canadian Texas. Why don't you tell the listeners about that?
Okay, so it was in June of 2015. We were out of school, and Thomas is hanging downtown hanging out with several friends. Caleb would have been one of them. Just that, it's just a hot summer evening. Actually, they had been hanging out at a girl's house, and Caleb went home, and so it just left Thomas, two other boys, and this girl. And shortly after Caleb goes home, the girl says, "Hey, I'm going to go to bed also. You're welcome to hang out on my porch, but I've got to go to bed. I have to work tomorrow." So Thomas and the two other boys sit there on the porch for a little while and decide that that's a little bit awkward. One of the boys in the group was 2 years older than Thomas. To my knowledge, that young man has never owned a car. He's never had a car. He walks everywhere he goes. So he says to the others, "Hey, let's walk down to the Allsups and get a drink." It was about 2 blocks away. They walk down to the Allsups. They get something to eat or drink. And then I'm assuming that same boy says, "Hey, let's just walk around for a while." So Thomas and these 2 boys end up walking around Canadian for a while, around, I would say, starting around 10:45, 11 o'clock. They walk for quite a way. At one point, I know they go into the laundromat, and they sit down in the laundromat to cool off a little bit. It's a 24/7 laundromat. They sit in there to cool off for a little bit, drink on their drinks a little bit. They did not stay there long because Thomas told me there was a no loitering sign, so they get up and leave. Continue to walk around town for a little bit longer. They end up on Main Street. They end up crossing Main Street, headed back to this girl's house, which wouldn't have been too far from there. And as soon as they cross Main Street, they're going down a side street. All of a sudden, this vehicle pulls up beside them, stops them, and is very accusatory. Rolls down the window. "Hey, what were you doing back there? Why were you touching that doorknob? What were you doing?" And the boys don't really know what to say to this person. They don't know who he is. They don't know why he's questioning them. And so they don't really answer. And, they're kind of like, "We don't know what you're talking about." And so for whatever reason, in his being accusatory, he's also swearing at them. He's using the F word. He recognizes Thomas out of the group. And so he starts telling Thomas, "You need to call your mom. Call your mom and tell her what you've been doing." Well, in Thomas's mind, he's thinking, apparently I've been doing something wrong, but I don't know what I've been doing wrong, so I don't know what I'm going to call my mom and tell her. And so he doesn't do it. And so then he says, get in my car. And Thomas, like I said, doesn't know this person, doesn't know this person is associated with law enforcement. They know there's some kind of insignia on the truck, but they don't know what it is. Or,
and Thomas
it's dark.
doesn't know that this guy who is yelling at him is friends with his father.
No, he doesn't.
Okay. Please continue.
So, yes, so he's very reluctant about getting into the vehicle with a stranger. He doesn't know who he is. Finally, the other two boys kind of whisper to him, hey, maybe if you get in the vehicle with him, he'll go away and we can go home. So Thomas gets into the truck with him. Lewis continues to question him when he gets in the truck. What are you guys doing? You better tell me the truth, blah, blah, blah. Thomas says, we're just walking around town. Lets Thomas out of the truck, continues to swear at the three of them. They need to get the F home, blah, 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 drives off. So in the meantime, although Lewis was a deputy in a neighboring county, he also worked in an oil field company that my current husband worked for. My current husband helped him get that job. He has his number. He calls him shortly after he questions the boys. My husband is asleep. He's not a night owl. He is asleep. His phone rings. It wakes him up. He sees that it's Lewis. He says, I'm not talking to Lewis. He doesn't know. He doesn't know if it's work related. Why is he calling him at midnight? Doesn't answer the call. He leaves a voicemail. So my husband listens to the voicemail, and it says something to the extent of, just wanted to let you know, Thomas was downtown messing around, or something to that nature. And so Chris tells me the message, and we kind of look at each other, and I'm like, well, why does he care? He's not law enforcement here, so I don't know. I don't really get what's going on. Thomas is not a person who's ever been, in trouble, not in trouble at school, not in trouble with law enforcement. So it's a bit unusual. Thomas comes in a little bit, before 12, because he never misses curfew. He was home shortly before 12. And I say, hey, what's going on? And he said, well, did some guy call here? And I said, yes. And he said, who is that guy? And so I start telling Thomas who he is. And actually, we went to church together. And so I said, you know who he is, this is where he sits, blah, blah. And so Thomas goes, oh, okay. He goes, well, why is he stopping me? And I said, I don't know. I said, I was hoping you could tell me that. And he goes, I don't know. He said, he's accusing us of touching a doorknob, blah, 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 whatever. So I'm like, okay, so initially I don't think a ton about it. I just think it's kind of weird. I'm certain that the sitting sheriff is not going to be overly appreciative necessarily of, Lewis acting in his, out of his jurisdiction or in Pearson's jurisdiction, so, but the whole thing is kind of weird, and it was late. And so I just said to Thomas, I said, okay, I don't really understand what's going on. Let's go to bed. We'll talk about this tomorrow. Tucker was also home. He was home for the summer. So on Saturday, the both of us grill him several times about, okay, tell me again, like, what were you doing? Start me at the beginning. What were you doing? Why do you think he stopped you? Were you touching a doorknob? What were you doing? To which Thomas said, claimed no, that he was not. So it just doesn't really make a lot of sense. And Thomas was also leaving on Sunday. This happened on a Friday. On Sunday, Thomas is leaving to go to a Rotary leadership camp for the week. So I talk pretty hard to Thomas on Saturday, and I tell him, I really feel like I need to go tell Sheriff Pearson because he's out of jurisdiction. this whole thing makes me uneasy. I don't know why he put you in the car with him. I just don't get it. So I'm gonna go seek advice and talk to Sheriff Pearson, but I tell Thomas, you better be telling me the truth, because if you truly were messing around, if you were truly trying to break into this building or whatever, and I basically go make a big jerk of
Mm-hmm.
myself, you're in trouble. You're in big trouble. And he's like, no, Mom, I swear, we were just walking around town. So Monday morning, I go talk to Sheriff Pearson, and we talk about it. And in fact, Sheriff Pearson and his chief assistant deputy kind of laugh about it, because they're like, now wait, who was with your son? Who did he stop? And I tell them, and they're like, oh my gosh, those kids are not even on our radar. Those kids are not kids that do bad stuff. Could they possibly have been messing around? Did they possibly jiggle a door handle to see if, the business was unlocked? Okay, sure. Those are kind of normal, teenage things, and they're just kind of laughing about it. In a way, I mean, he was
Mm-hmm.
upset, but he just was very astounded that these are the boys who got stopped. And he was not appreciative that Lewis would stop these boys out of his jurisdiction and not contact Hemphill County to let them know.
Right.
So after leaving Sheriff Pearson's office, and he told me that he was going to visit with the Texas Ranger for our area, he said, I'm going to turn it over to him, because we're running against each other. I don't want it to look like I'm playing, dirty games, whatever. So I tell him that's fine. I go home. I call the sheriff in the county where Lewis is currently working, and tell him as well, and just let him know. Later, I did get a call from the Texas Ranger. He did not feel like any charges that should be pressed, and so I really didn't know where else or what else I should do with it. I did consider hiring an attorney, but I didn't, in a small town, like I said, I went to church with these people. I didn't know how big of a deal to make out of it. And so I just dropped it.
I think what we're trying to establish
Oh,
here is that before Thomas disappeared in November 2016, the guy who is now was totally responsible for investigating his disappearance a year and some months beforehand had a run-in with Thomas for seemingly no reason.
yes.
And
Yes.
that, and in fact, it wasn't seemingly no reason. To this day, nobody believes Thomas was doing anything that night. He or these other kids were doing anything that night when Lewis pulled them over and accused them and pulled Thomas into his car, etc.
No.
Okay. So,
No.
um, so what we're saying is that Thomas disappearing, he had some sort of history that started a year and some months before, and I'm glad you explained all that. Do you know if Lewis ever got in any trouble for doing that? Did he get a reprimand? Anything like that?
I was under the impression that the sheriff from the other county did speak with him about it, and that he did get into some trouble.
Okay. And to your knowledge, being that Lewis and your ex-husband were friends, did it ever get back to you through the grapevine from your ex-husband that Lewis had anything to say? Did your ex-husband ever have anything to say about his friend Lewis harassing your son?
He did, and they talked about it. My ex-husband was upset that Lewis called the stepfather and not him, which, and I understand that. He said, you have my number. Why didn't you call me if you had an issue with my son?
Mm-hmm.
So I know they had some words.
Okay. All right. So there's this seemingly very peculiar, especially since Lewis is out of his jurisdiction. If he saw something going wrong, then all he had to do was call the sheriff or a deputy that was on duty. He could have just sat there in his car and said, hey, I see these three kids. They're doing something suspicious. A deputy in Hemphill could have come down and done this instead of Lewis
Exactly.
taking care of himself. Okay. Now, the other thing, though, is that this seems to be There are a lot of rumors circulating around Canadian Texas and Hemphill as a county about Lewis doing this to other kids.
Yes.
All right. Now, the problem is, to tell the listeners, is that we really haven't been able to track down any particular times, locations, and anything like that, at least to my
Right.
knowledge. Okay. I'm not sure. I have to tell listeners, I don't know what to make of it. All I know is the story that I believe that Penny has told me and now all of you about her own son Thomas being harassed by Sheriff Lewis, who once again wasn't even sheriff at the time. This happened a year and some months beforehand, but it seems that Lewis does have this reputation in Canadian and the surrounding area, even though once again we haven't been able to put our finger on anything. And to your knowledge, is he being sued by any parents or anybody in the county for any harassment that he's given to anybody?
No, not that
To
I can find.
to your knowledge, okay.
Yeah.
But the other thing though is that also kind of through the grapevine rumor is that this was not the last time that Lewis harassed Thomas. Now, just for the record, did Thomas, after this what happened in 2015, ever tell you about any other instances of Lewis harassing him, ever pulling him over, ever anything? Anything?
No, he did
Okay.
not.
Okay. But you have heard about it though, haven't you? Like once again, through the grapevine.
Yes, I have heard that Lewis was harassing Thomas.
Okay. But Thomas never told you about it. Has your ex-husband, Thomas's father, ever said anything to you about it? Had he ever heard about any of this?
No.
Okay.
No.
All right. So we just don't know. It's just something we have the thing that's on the record. Everything else seems to be a little hit and miss. Rumors, maybe axe grinding. I just don't know, and I don't live there, so I don't know. And being that you
Right.
haven't been able to put your finger on anything except rumors, we just don't know. All we know is that the guy who harassed Thomas in 2015 is the same guy who was responsible for investigating his disappearance in November 2016. Now, here though is
Exactly.
something else. When you first saw Sheriff Lewis talk to him about Thomas's disappearance, we have to remember originally he called and told your new husband, not Thomas's father, but his stepfather, your husband, that he believed that Thomas committed suicide. However, when he finally did talk to you, what did Lewis say to you that his opinion was about Thomas disappearing?
That he felt like he just ran away, that he just left.
Okay, I guess I'm just gonna have. Did he tell you that he believed that Thomas was gay and he ran off with an older man? Did Lewis tell you that?
Yes, he did. Not the day that he went missing, but a few days later, he did tell me that he thought Thomas was gay and he had met a man online, an older man, and he had run off with him.
Was there anybody else in the room when he said that? Was it just you
Yes,
and him?
no, we had a meeting actually about a month after Thomas went missing
Okay.
with Sheriff Lewis, the chief assistant deputy, the Texas Ranger, Mike Smith, and the major over him, Todd Snyder. All of them told us that Thomas was gay and that he had run away with an older man.
In your opinion, as Thomas's mother, from the day he was born, do you believe that Thomas was gay?
I have never seen any indication that he was gay.
Okay. And being that Sage was his girlfriend, has she ever said anything to anybody about suspecting that actually Thomas was gay?
No.
Has Caleb, Christian, this Mike kid that we have to remember that Thomas was a very popular guy, president of his
Mm-hmm.
class. Anybody, and since he disappeared, has ever come to you and said, you know what, I think Thomas might have been gay? Ever?
I haven't had a student, I haven't had a teacher, I haven't had a coach, I haven't had a youth pastor, a pastor. Nobody has told me that they thought Thomas was gay. Not one person.
Okay. So once again, who was in the room when Lewis told you this? Once again, if you can name names.
Sure. Sheriff Lewis, the chief assistant deputy, the Texas Ranger for our area who was assisting or not assisting on the case, I don't know, and then the major over him.
So there was like 6 people in the room, something like
Well,
that.
7. Yeah,
7.
because both my husband and my ex-husband were both there.
All right. So they were all there, and that is what came out of Sheriff Lewis's mouth. Has he ever offered any reason that he believes that, any sort of emails, texts, Facebook posts, anything to support that belief?
He claims that there are some text messages between Thomas and another a girl who's just a friend that we haven't even talked about today.
Mm-hmm.
There are some text messages. I have seen the text messages. They're sexual in nature. It doesn't say, that in the context of it doesn't say that he wanted. Actually, he was asking this girl, would you consider not? I mean, this is going to seem weird. He wasn't asking the girl specifically if she would do that because they were not boyfriend and girlfriend. I think he was really just getting an opinion. Would a girl do this?
Would a girl do what?
What he was asking.
Would a girl do what?
Some kind of sexual act.
Okay. And how did he even, but Thomas's phone, we're still not sure if it was found or not. How was this text messages, or was this something on like Facebook Messenger? Was it actual text messages as we understand them in 2018?
It was a text message, and it was obtained by my private investigator. He is the one who showed me the text messages.
And this was off the phone that you said this woman discovered in the woods?
No, this was from records, cell phone records that were obtained, I guess.
See, that's interesting because my knowledge is that you can't obtain text messages from any records.
Unless he got, honestly, I don't know. Maybe the private investigator got them from that girl's phone.
Okay.
That may be.
Well, this is I think that you probably need to nail that down, Penny.
Okay.
If I could say that publicly, you need to nail that down, where that all came from. It doesn't seem to me like that is some sort of text that had anything to do with Thomas being gay, but I didn't see the message, and it seems to me that you're paraphrasing it, so that makes it a little difficult. Yeah. But being that there were several people in the room when this came out of Sheriff Lewis's mouth, then that is something that is noteworthy, and it seems very unprofessional. I'm not saying, I really don't care if your son was gay or not. I don't care. Exactly. But if he is going to make something like that it could mean that it led to him disappearing, then that is a serious allegation. That is a serious allegation that needs to be followed up on. It doesn't seem to me, in all the time we've been talking for a couple months now, that he told you that, but Sheriff Lewis or his deputies have never followed up on that lead, to your knowledge.
They took his Xbox.
Mm-hmm.
They couldn't get anything off of it, to my understanding. But there was nothing in social media. Everybody that was on his social media that I could look at were all people that I knew. I never found anybody outside that I didn't know. So I find it hard to believe that there was somebody on social media. I mean, I just don't. That doesn't make sense to me.
Okay. All right. That's just, that's something else that people are going to.
And Lewis can't prove it because I have asked numerous times. I have asked him several times. Okay, fine, he's gay and he ran away. Where is your proof of that? Show me your proof. Tell me where you're getting this information. And then he never wants to talk about it again. It's just like he just wants to move on to something else.
It's just like he doesn't want to show you that picture again either, isn't it?
Exactly.
All right. Now, I think the listeners at this point, after talking about Lewis as much as we have, we can reveal that you have some serious suspicions about the sheriff's department regarding Thomas's disappearance, to put it simply. Yes. And this goes far beyond them just being like the Keystone Cops, not being able to investigate it like we hear in so many other missing persons cases where it seems like the police dropped the ball here and they didn't take this seriously. You think it's something more than that?
it kind of all points that way. Yes.
Okay. When would you say you first started feeling that way? How many days, weeks, months after Thomas disappeared?
About 2 weeks after Thomas went missing.
That soon.
Yes.
That soon. Do you remember a specific reason for you believing, for starting to think that?
Well, even initially when Thomas went missing, my mind kind of did go there because the things that he said to me about my son just, it didn't make sense. That's not his norm. That's not his character. And so it just did not, none of it made sense. And I would think that maybe he did. And then I would be like, no, that's crazy. That would never happen. Or that would be extremely stupid on his part. Why would he do that?
Mm-hmm.
But nothing that came out of his mouth made any kind of sense at all. And about 2 weeks after Thomas went missing, I had gone back to work. I had hired a private investigator, and I was like, there's nothing at this point, there's nothing else I can do. I need to go to work. I can't just sit at home. So I go back to work, and I was sitting in my classroom one day, and of course, I was just super overwhelmed by everything that was going on, with the investigation, with Thomas being missing, and then just the outpouring from the community, just everything. They were paying our bills, they were bringing us grocery, just everything that they were doing. It was so overwhelming. And the people that I worked with in my building were super great, and my administrator, my principal was awesome, and she would just come by my room and just stick her head in and give me a thumbs up or kind of wave at me and go on. But on that day, somebody had brought me a drink and left it in the office, like a Coke or a tea or something. And it was on the secretary's desk, and she said, "Whose drink is that?" And the secretary said, "Oh, that's Penny's. I just haven't taken it to her yet." And so the principal said, "Well, I'll take it to her." So she walks it down to me, to my room. She puts it on my desk. She says, "So-and-so, brought you this drink. We're glad you're here." And she walks out. Well, I'm just overwhelmed by emotions. So I just start crying at my desk. I'm just sitting there crying. I don't have students. And I begin to pray. And I'm praying. And I've been a Christian, I would say all my life for the most part. I've always been in church. And I'm praying, and I've always heard other people say, that they have heard God's voice, that God has spoken to them. I've never experienced that. I think most of us do not experience that. But I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden I just hear two words, and I hear "trust me," and then an image of Lewis pops into my mind. And it really startled me. And I just sat up, I stopped crying. I said, "No, yeah, I can trust you, but, that image, that just must have been my own self-conscious. I don't know where that came from, but that there's, no way." And, so I argued with God about that. But just even in the days that followed, just things happened, and things that Sheriff Lewis said, he contradicted himself, and there was nothing right about it.
All right. And the thing is that we discovered some things recently that go to, and it's just new information that has been, not to pat myself on the back, but something that I discovered, and we're going to get to that. Okay. So this is more than just some sort of divine intervention here. It might have been your subconscious talking, that you knew something maybe that you didn't know, and it had to do with the video, but we're going to get to that. First, I want to talk about Pine Gregory. He was a deputy on duty that night. He is the guy that Tucker rode around with from approximately 4 a.m. to somewhere around 5:45 to 6 a.m. He has a little bit of a past too, and it's hard to imagine how he even became a deputy in Hemphill County. What had happened to him in 2003?
He was off duty at his home, and a person had been driving, I guess, by his house a couple of times, and maybe pulled up into his driveway to turn around. He decides that this person is out to get him or watching him or something. And so he jumps into his car, he chases this person down, stops them. He does draw down on them. It turned out that this person was a pizza delivery woman who was simply trying to deliver a pizza. I believe, I don't know that he was fired from that job, but he was dismissed from that law enforcement
Position.
agency.
But now he is still, in 2018, one of the deputies in Hemp Hill County.
Yes, he is.
Charged with a felony with a gun.
Yes.
And he was the guy who was on duty that night. He was the guy that Tucker rode around with that night when they were looking for Thomas.
Yes.
Okay. Did Thomas explain, kind of maybe give you details about what it was like riding around with Pine Gregory for those 2 hours, what Pine Gregory was doing?
Yes. Tucker said that he thought, he didn't really say what they talked about. I don't know that they talked a whole lot, but he did say that he thought it was odd that there was no radio communication. There was nothing coming across the radio in his car. But he was texting someone, and Tucker thought it was odd that he would be texting, and then Gregory explains to him at some point in the night, "Oh, I'm texting my wife about our plans for Thanksgiving Day."
So Pine Gregory's wife was up at 4 a.m?
Apparently, I don't know.
Okay. Did Pine Gregory, during the course of this conversation, ever give any maybe theories as to what could have happened to Thomas and where he might be? Anything like that to Tucker that Tucker could pass on to you?
He just said he talked about kids running away or leaving or just not, coming home, just missing curfew just because they're in high school and they don't think they have to come home, and that they usually turn up, and just some stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. In Tucker's opinion, did it look like Pine Gregory was actually trying to look for Thomas, or was it just like he was just driving around?
I think it appeared that he was actually looking. Like I said, they did go to Sage's house, and then I'm not sure where else they went. But I think to Tucker it did appear that he was searching.
Okay. Now here's where I'm gonna have to do a little bit of talking. Of course, Penny's been doing a lot of talking, but I'm gonna have to explain this to the listeners. First of all, one more thing: Pine Gregory was riding around in a sheriff's deputy vehicle, with Hemp Hill County on the front, a light bar on the top, SUV type of thing, like a real police vehicle.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Because here's the deal, and we're going to go back, listeners, to the Abrahams video. I told you that Penny had sent the video to me. Now, I will tell you that I watched the whole video, and it wasn't until the end, and I'm not here to make fun of you, Penny, but you didn't tell me afterwards until you told me that the video is off by 50 minutes. Is that true?
Mm-hmm.
Is that 50 minutes? Okay. And is that something that this Abrahams guy told you when he gave you the video?
Yes, it was.
Okay, and is this a situation where it's kind of like, back in the days with VCR, people have the blinking time? He just hasn't figured out how to correct the time on his own video equipment? Something like that?
Yeah, probably.
Okay. All right, so the reason this comes up is because I looked at the video and it's off by 50 minutes. So when the time on the video says midnight, it's actually 10 till 1. The video time is 50 minutes behind. All right. So you have to keep that in mind. So when I started watching the video, I missed the first 50 minutes of it. So I went back and looked at it. Now, how many people would you say have looked at that video since you got your hands on it however long ago?
Maybe 3 or 4.
Okay.
Well, no, maybe more than that.
Okay. And in fact, once again, this is the video, at least partial of it, that was seen on the Crime Watch Daily show that people can find on YouTube. A very, very small snippet, whereas I got to see the whole thing from multiple angles. In fact, one of the angles is in color. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, it was just this past Sunday. We were conducting this interview. What is it today? June 5th, 2018. Yeah. 2 days ago on June 3rd, I was watching the video after you told me that the time was off by 50 minutes. And in doing that, the first time through, I have to admit, I didn't see much. Saw a lot of red SUVs, as we've already discussed. But when that time correction is factored into everything, What did I see? I saw 2 sheriff's vehicles go by Abraham's at 11:42 p.m. the night that Thomas disappeared. Okay, now the reason this is a big deal, of course, is because Abraham's, where this video was taken, is approximately a half mile from where Thomas was pumping gas. All right, and we already have a timestamp of the time that he was pumping gas, and I'm going to put all those gallons into a Durango, it's going to take a few minutes. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
There are 2 sheriff vehicles. How do I know they're sheriff's vehicles? They are unmarked, but you can see in the video the glowing of their computer screens in the front seat. There is no doubt in my mind that these are 2 sheriff's vehicles. Now, I'm not saying the sheriff was driving one of them. I don't know who was driving them. But they are definitely Hemphill County law enforcement vehicles. They come down, and the thing is, they come from the south. So just a minute before they go past Abraham's, seemingly they were by Frank's where Thomas was pumping gas. Now I wanted you to know to tell me something. Has Nathan Lewis or any of his deputies ever told you that they were in the area of Frank's the night Thomas disappeared?
No.
But we have proof now, and you've now gone back and looked at the video. I showed you the pictures, the free frames. You've seen them. Those are definitely sheriff's vehicles. Definitely, right? Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
The sheriff nor his deputies have ever owned up to being in the area where Thomas disappeared that night. Now, how is it that the sheriff and everybody who's watched the video, I don't know why they missed that. I have a suspicion is because, you really have to watch the entire video to get a feeling for Canadian Texas at that late hour. There's not much going on, but there are cars going by. And after a while, you start to be able to see, well, this is a kind of vehicle, that's a kind of vehicle. There's 18-wheelers. And those are the only 2 vehicles that go by the cameras that have glowing in the front seat. And once again, there is no doubt in my mind they are sheriff's vehicles. They were close to the area where Thomas disappeared. And they were coming from the south. So once again, you look at a map. Frank's is south of Abraham's. These 2 vehicles came from the south. One makes a right onto Main Street. One continues north. All right. You were a little stunned to learn that, weren't you? You didn't know that.
I was.
You didn't know that.
No.
You had not noticed that. Now, admittedly, had you seen that part of the video before and it just maybe never registered to you, or what do you think?
Yeah, I had seen it before. I mean, I'm sure I watched it all the way through to that point, but like you said, it's so hard to tell what those vehicles are.
But it is. It is, unless...
Well, especially in black and white.
Right. Well, and the one, though, that I looked at is in color. It's that one video that's the one color video where they are like a tannish silver type of color. These are not your traditional type of police vehicles that we will talk about in a bit. These are 2 SUVs, GMC Chevy SUVs that are right back to back, fender to fender, going through that intersection. Both of them have glowing in the front, through the driver's window. You can see right in there. No doubt in my mind, those are police vehicles. Once again. So Penny has been suspecting for like a year and a half or whatever it is now that the police are involved, and now just 2 days ago, I was able to determine that two deputies, or the sheriff and a deputy, were in the area of where Thomas disappeared. Now I want the listeners to think about that. Nobody is more shocked than I was, but that's what the video shows, and you've gone back and looked at it for yourself. So this is very suspicious that Nathan Lewis, he can talk all he wants about your son running off with a gay man and all these committing suicide, but he himself has never admitted that he or some of his deputies were in the area where Thomas disappeared.
Exactly.
And this also goes back to the picture that you saw that was taken from behind Thomas while he was pumping gas that Lewis showed you, that now is seemingly disappeared, and seemingly everybody says no, that never existed. That would also lend to the idea that was taken from a police vehicle from a dash cam, because we now know that two of the sheriff's deputies, their police cars, were in the area where Thomas disappeared. They could have been anywhere else in that county. They just happened to be on 2nd Street near Frank's at the time that we now know that seemingly Thomas's phone clicked off.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. That and so how people have missed that, I don't know. I'm not trying to say I'm special or anything, but this seems to be a significant piece of information. Just saying.
Yes.
And you now know that I know that you're going to take that to the Texas Rangers. This may just be a first for Unfound, but I'm going to jump into the interview right at this second to make a couple corrections, a clarification, and something for you to think about. I'm recording this insert on June 14th, 2018. The interview was done on June 5th, 2018. I'm doing this because since the interview, I've had an opportunity to watch the video many times, and I want to make sure we get this video stuff right the first time. First, a couple corrections. Actually, the sheriff's vehicles are seen multiple times that night between 11:42 p.m. and 6:23 a.m., at least 8 times. How did I miss that the first time around? Frankly, because you really have to be watching for them. They look so much like regular SUVs. If you aren't really looking for the indicators on the vehicles that make them different from private vehicles, you'll just think they're private vehicles. Another correction. I've been told that the deputy at 6:23 a.m. is Dan D. Herrera, not Pine Gregory. The clarification. At least one of the vehicles in the video is marked, but once again, with the lighting and it being at night, it really does look unmarked. The light bar is even hard to see. In fact, I'm now convinced on further review that there were 2 marked vehicles and an unmarked one cruising Canadian that night. Finally, what does this new information mean now that I've inserted it into the interview? Yes, with the revelation that the sheriff's vehicles were around Canadian Texas that night and they didn't disappear for those 6 hours, you may think that somehow that lets the sheriff and his deputies off the hook. Well, not so. The sheriff has stated in multiple interviews that he believes Thomas was driving his Durango around Canadian all night. Well, if that's the case, then how did at least 2 sheriff's vehicles miss Thomas and his Durango for 6.5 hours in a town with only 2 stoplights? Because the deputies were out there. The video proves it. Now, back to the interview. Now, something else interesting about the video is that at 6:23 a.m., it seems like Pine Gregory and I'm believing Sheriff Lewis actually park in the right under the camera where Abraham's is, and you've seen that part of the video as well.
Yes.
Okay. So I saw that. They talk for about a minute. I don't know what they're talking about. Pine Gregory now driving an official vehicle with all the light bar and everything on it comes from the south. And then it seems like the other vehicle, one of these vehicles that I described earlier that I happened to notice, comes from the north. Deputy gets out, talks to the other guy. They talk for about a minute. They get in their vehicles and leave. Now, what's weird about that is seemingly at the same time, right up the street, you saw the video from Alexander's of this Durango going up and down the street. And here these 2 guys are sitting in the parking lot not far from there.
Exactly.
And in fact, one of the deputies, when he pulls out, he goes in the direction of where that Durango would have been coming back down Alexander Street that morning, and seemingly never sees the Durango.
Sure. Yep.
Now, I know this is, you're going to, once again, listeners are going to have to look at a map to see what I'm talking about all this, but at 6:23 a.m., when the deputy pulls out and goes south, he would have been heading in the exact same direction where the video is that Penny saw of her son in the Durango with the writing on it, going back to 2nd Street. They should have passed each other. They should have, just about. I mean, there's almost 99% chance that they should have passed each other somewhere down the street, but the deputy, to this day, has never said he saw the Durango.
Right.
Once again, very curious. Very, very suspicious because, as you remember, you told me that the timestamp on that video that you saw of the Durango was what, 5:45 or something like that.
Yes.
And not to mention that later, Sheriff Lewis is claiming that there was a video of it pulling into the treatment plant at like 10 till 6. I mean, the deputy and the sheriff are all over the place, and somehow this Durango just kind of slips by them. It does seem like that, doesn't it, Penny?
Yeah, it does.
It does, and it's like I said, it's hard to audio show. It's hard to explain that. So what we're saying is, despite what Crime Watch Daily said about all these SUVs riding around all night, all it really matters is that we have proof that the Durango was out at 5:45 in the morning. It was on a street where the deputy, at least two deputies, if not the sheriff, were on the same street. The sheriff and the deputy claimed they never saw the Durango. That's what essentially it comes down to. So forget about all this other sightings the rest of the night. The only things that matter is when the cops are out there and we know the Durango's out there. It's hard to understand. What is the Texas Rangers? Now that we can move on to this, I just hope the listeners can understand the importance of all that. What have the Texas Rangers had to say about all of this?
So the initial Texas Ranger that was on the case, I don't know with how it was explained to me. I guess he can still investigate the case, but as of January 2018, there are two different rangers investigating the case. I have talked to them 2 or 3 times. I haven't talked to them in several months. Not really sure where they're at on the case. The first ranger that was on the case about this time a year ago, told me that I needed to fire my private investigator. Not sure why I would be given that advice from a Texas Ranger. I can't explain him. He was never very courteous when he spoke to me. I can't tell you about him. I don't know about him. These other 2 rangers that have been on the case seem to take it a lot more seriously. I don't know. I will be contacting them to let them know. And I will also be contacting the Attorney General.
All right. Of course, with this new video information as well.
Sure.
Absolutely. Okay. And in fact, there has been a petition or something that this is going to be turned over. This case might be turned over to the Attorney General's office for some reason.
It has. There are 2 Attorney General investigators investigating the case.
Okay. The FBI, has it been involved in this case?
The FBI is involved in this case. My office is out of Amarillo. I have contacted the office 2 or 3 times. I actually went to the office and stood outside the door. They will not talk to me.
Okay. All right. So you don't know what's going on there?
No.
Okay. So this case, in your opinion, what is the main number one reason that this case is now in the hands of the Attorney General instead of the local sheriff, Sheriff Lewis? I mean, they don't harbor, I think, the suspicions that you do, but why do you think the number one reason is that it's now in the hands of somebody else is responsible for it?
Because there are so many inconsistencies that come out of the sheriff's office. You can read about them in the paper. We actually have a website. It's called findingthomas.weebly.com, I believe. Mm-hmm. And if you go back and, listen to media or read what's been written in our local paper or in some of the regional papers, the story the story from the sheriff's department changes. It's this one time, it's this another time. It's just weird. And so we really made a major push to get it into somebody else's hands that is completely non-political and, we'll just take a new objective view on the case.
Okay, and how long is it? Okay, so are you saying as of June 5th, 2018, Lewis is now not the number one person responsible for this case?
He is welcome to investigate the case. But the Attorney General office is doing their own investigation.
Okay. We had talked about Philip Klein. He's a private investigator. Early on in this conversation, his name has popped up once in a while, especially considering, I guess, this in the situation of the cell phone. Would you say that you had? How did you find him? Would you say that you had a positive experience with him?
He's from Houston, which is a long way from the Texas Panhandle.
Mm-hmm.
I had never heard of Philip Klein. Actually, the owner of Abraham Trading, like I said earlier, he's a good high school classmate friend of mine. He is super smart. I talk to him a lot when I need advice. I actually had sought out a private investigator through him first. He gave me the name. I called him. That person is no longer a private investigator. A super nice man. He called me back a day or two later with the name of a private investigator. I was uncomfortable using that person because, I didn't know anything about him. And so I had the name and number. I just hadn't contacted them. And then I had a woman who, I had taught her kids. I've had them in school, and they were just very concerned about, the whole situation. And in less than a week after Thomas went missing, she brought me lunch one day to my house before I went back to work, and we visited. And this person is I've taught school for 23 years, and this person is the biggest advocate for her own children in education that I have ever met. And I thought, well, while I have this girl sitting here, I'm going to ask her questions. And I said, tell me what you would do if you were in my shoes. And she first said private investigator, which I was already considering. And we talked about some other things. And then she went back to private investigator. And then she said, I know this guy, or she said, I know of him. I don't really know him. Her family she has some family that's crossed paths with him in some way. And she said that they really liked him. And he specifically he specifies in missing children. And so she gave me his name and number, and I called him not long after she left. And that's how I came in contact with him. My experience has been positive.
Okay. So you organized the search that found the cell phone. You're still not sure if that was Thomas's cell phone or not. Do you, just once again, being that we're coming back to it now, do you believe it's Thomas's cell phone?
Well, I believe what they have at the lab is Thomas's cell phone. I just don't believe that is the phone that was found at the search site.
So where do you believe they found Thomas's phone then?
I have no idea.
All right. So the cell phone question, I have to say, it seems like a year and a half later, is still very up in the air.
Yes.
It's still like a mystery as to, let's just put it this way. The cell phone, Thomas's cell phone, was not found in the vehicle.
No.
All right. It was not found with the backpack, to your knowledge.
No.
All right.
No. Yeah, to my knowledge.
Okay. But there was a cell phone, somebody's cell phone that was found during this search, that the private investigator organized down, that we talked about earlier. But you don't believe then that cell phone is Thomas's cell phone either.
I don't believe it, Matt. According to this person, this girl who found the cell phone, the description did not match. It did not match in color. It did not match in model.
Okay.
According to her.
All right. But you have heard, though, that there is a cell phone that has been somewhere. It's somewhere. I mean, a year and a half later, I would think that it would be processed by now. Or however long, how long could it take? Unless they can't get into it, if it's locked out or something.
Right.
So if there is, how do I want to put this? So if there is a cell phone that you believe is Thomas's in the possession of, whether it's the FBI, the Attorney General's office, whoever, you don't know how that phone was found.
I do not. I don't know where that came from.
That's another perplexing part of this story. Okay. Does your private investigator believe that is Thomas's phone, the one that was found on his search that he organized?
He did not believe it was Thomas's phone.
Okay.
And he also saw the phone.
Okay.
Actually, his team saw the phone.
Mm-hmm.
On the day of that search, I was told by Philip Klein and his team that they did not believe that was Thomas's phone.
Okay.
I was also told by the sheriff and the chief assistant that they did not believe that that was Thomas's phone.
All right. But still, there is a phone out there that somebody believes is Thomas's that is in there's like two phones that have popped up, I guess, somehow.
Possibly. I don't know.
Okay, man, that is all right. Just
Answer
one
that
more
one.
stray. Usually the cell phone stuff is so. Yes, we found the cell phone. No, we didn't find the cell phone. But in this case, we're just not sure. Okay.
No.
Okay. We're not going to name his name, but a former deputy in Hemphill. What did he have to say about Lewis?
He says he believes that Thomas was being followed or harassed by Sheriff Lewis. I don't know if he witnessed it. I'm not sure why he has said that, but that has come forward recently.
Okay. Do you believe that this person might have an axe? Please, and we're not going to use his name or her name. I actually, now that I think about it, I don't know if it's a man or a woman anyway. I don't even remember if you told me the name.
Either.
All right.
Yeah, I don't either.
Do you think this is just an axe to grind, or do you think there's something to this?
It is possible that it is an axe to grind. I mean, like I said, I have not talked to this person myself, so I don't know exactly what they have said. I don't know if they witnessed it. I don't know how they know that or how they think they know that. So, I'm not sure how credible it is.
Okay. How did Sheriff Lewis react when you started the process that got the Attorney General involved? He actually talked to you about that, didn't he?
Yeah, well, so my attorney had made some open records requests way back in the fall of last year. The sheriff or the county attorney, I don't know really who or both maybe is to blame, I'm not really sure, in those open records requests did not submit any kind of sample or anything to the Attorney General on those requests. I believe there were 9 or 10 made. Sent nothing, no sampling, no nothing. So, of course, in December of 2017, when the time was up and the Attorney General's office had to make their decision, they said, well, we don't have anything to base a decision on, so we're going to say release the information. Didn't go over well with Sheriff Lewis or the county attorney, and so they in turn turned around and filed a lawsuit against the Attorney General's office. After that, we formed a petition on change.org on our Moms for Tom page, Facebook page, petitioning the sheriff or the county attorney to turn the case over to the Attorney General's office. We had, I think somebody said 8,000, I can't remember now, but over 8,000 signatures within days.
Wow. In a town of 2,500 people. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Penny.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, because like I said, they weren't all from Hemphill County.
Of course.
And I don't know who urged who or who made the decision, but the decision was made that the case be turned over to the Attorney General's office for review. I was not given a call by the Sheriff's Department, and late I did receive a call from the Chief Assistant Deputy saying that had happened. In the days that followed that, Sheriff Lewis kept, said some stuff like, I don't, and it's in the paper. I mean, it was written in the media. It is in the paper that, he just didn't know if they were going to take the case, if they were going to be able to be of any help, if they could do anything that hadn't already been done. Well, unbeknownst to him, the Attorney General's office had already contacted me telling me that they were definitely looking at the case, and they were, even though had not reviewed the whole thing, were pretty sure they were going to be looking at the case in some way. At that time, they didn't know if they would just assist or take it. They were unclear about that portion of it, but they were definitely looking at the case and going to take it.
And Sheriff Lewis at some point had said something to you like, "Do you really want to do this? Something like that. Do you really want to do, I don't know. I get the feeling he was like trying to play the victim. Like, do you really want to do this to me? Do you really?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. But he said something like that to you.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Just clarifying that. Okay. All right. Considering all that, what's it been like for you? I know it's tough. I've talked to a lot of mothers like yourself. This disappearance is the first one that Unfound will have covered that took place after Unfound was created. We started this program in September 2016. So 2 months later, your son disappeared. So it's a very, very recent disappearance.
Yes.
I realize that there's a lot of unique circumstances, especially considering the sheriff's office and everything. What's this been like for you and, of course, Thomas's father and his brother Tucker?
Well, of course, it's very, emotionally, it is, it's super hard to know. I mean, if Thomas had been in a car accident and he was killed, we would know that. And we would have had a funeral. We would have had a grieving, process, even though it's not normal to lose a child. I don't think, it's not the normal sequence. We could have dealt with that and gone on down the road. Something like this that is just ongoing, you don't know. I don't know if Thomas is alive or if he is deceased. I have no evidence that shows either way, so I can't say that he is or he isn't. And just, to have no evidence, and then, to be honest, the sheriff's department has not.
Yeah.
Some days they're nice, some days they're not.
And we know what you suspect of them. So if they're being not nice, maybe we know why. So yeah, there's that.
Well, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And and then it is a small community, and it is very tight knit. And so, to have something like this go on, especially maybe concerning some people that I go or did go to church with, I don't attend there anymore. It is very concerning, and it took me a long time to even tell people that were close to me what my suspicions were, because first of all, it's a huge accusation to make.
It is.
Especially in a community like this, it's huge.
It is.
I don't hate the sheriff. I've never hated the sheriff. I just want him to do the right thing.
Right. And it doesn't help that he's made some comments about your son that can't be substantiated. It seems like he has left some things out of evidence, maybe with the video about being close to the location where Thomas disappeared. Those don't help.
No.
If he had admitted, it just happened to be that me and one of my deputies were in vehicles just right down the street. We can't believe we didn't see something. Had he said that at the time, you might feel differently about him. If
Sure.
In that meeting with those 6 other people in the room, if he would have said, you know what, we're just not sure what happened to him, but we're going to work our hardest to find out. If he hadn't told your current husband, Thomas's stepfather, we think he committed suicide just like hours after finding the vehicle, you might feel differently. But this is what happened.
Exactly.
This is what happened.
If he hadn't returned the car to me on the day that he went missing. I mean,
right. Without processing it. Yes. Yes.
I had to ask them to list Thomas on a missing persons database because it had not been done. And I'm like, you're the one telling me he ran away. Isn't that one of the first things? I mean, I'm not law enforcement, but if you think he ran away, why wouldn't you list him on a database?
Yeah.
There's just a lot that doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. Right. Right. And as listeners know, a lot of complaints about police all over the United States.
Sure.
Here in Florida, Texas, Alaska, Pennsylvania. But I have covered at least 2 other disappearances where we believe police were involved. This is not, it's rare, but it's not unusual. Okay, this has happened before. and we try to treat those cases a little bit differently. Unfound does not just throw out these accusations. We are not cop haters or anything else. For us to
No.
talk about the police the way we have done in this interview, there has to be overwhelming evidence that something other than just incompetency was at play. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. And because that's how we do things on Unfound. I don't go after police just because I like to. I don't like to. I think they
Right.
deserve criticism like any other profession in the world. But in this particular case, once again, with my experience, over 80 cases covered now, what is going on in this case with the police department, sheriff's office, whatever you want to call it, is highly unusual.
Mhm.
Highly.
I agree.
Highly. Okay.
I agree.
Why don't you tell listeners, you have a Facebook page, you have a website. Why don't you tell the listeners about those things, where they can find you?
You can find me on Facebook. It's Moms for Tom, Moms number 4, Tom.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a webpage called www.findingthomas.weebly.com.
Okay. Any place else? I know there's plenty of news articles out there, both, like you said, from Houston and elsewhere. I'll be linking to those as well.
Yes. We've been covered in the Amarillo, the news media, TV, and newspaper in Amarillo. Of course, our local paper. There was a little bit in the Hill Country area. There was some articles down there, but that most of it is on our webpage. That is a compilation of social media.
Okay. And I'm looking at the website right now. It is findtombrown.com.
Okay, sorry.
There's no Weebly in there. It's findtombrown.com. I'm looking at that website right now. We've been talking for over 3 hours. It's one of the longest interviews we've done, but I think that this case warrants all this time. I think the listeners understand that now as well. But any final words before we end this interview, Penny?
Well, yeah, I just want the truth. I just want to know if Tom's out there. Let's just bring him home. Let's just put this to bed. Obviously, there have to be consequences at this point, but first and foremost, I just want my son home. That's all I want. Or I just want to know what happened, and I think I deserve to know what happened. I think our community deserves to know what happened.
I agree. Especially of a community of 2,500 people where something like a disappearance does not happen all the time. Once again, we started off this talking about how small Canadian Texas is. San Francisco, LA, people disappearing all the time. Canadian Texas, not quite the same way. So,
no.
I'm going to continue to work with you. Of course, we've been talking for a couple months now. You've sent me some information. You know what has come out of it. We've already talked about that, the video, some things that we've discovered that are new in the video that I hope are going to push things forward. So I hope that, Penny, we can continue to work together in any capacity that you see fit for me. I want to continue to do that for you.
Sure, we appreciate it.
Okay. And I appreciate you being on this episode of Unfound.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. And that was my interview with Penny Meek, mother of Thomas Brown. I thank her for joining me and all of you on the program. And I thank her for doing such a great job for over 3 hours. That is not easy. Of course, it's also not easy for her because of the doubts Penny has about the competency and, more importantly, the integrity of the people investigating Thomas's disappearance. You heard how the seeds of doubt got planted in her mind very early on. And it certainly didn't help her confidence in the Hemp Hill Sheriff's Office when less than 2 weeks ago, I had to tell her what I saw on the Abraham investment video. The sections that were mentioned in the interview are now available to watch on YouTube. I don't think I need to do much highlighting of the essential points from the interview like I usually do in my summations. You now know what I know. You heard what I heard. With the pictures posted on Facebook and the videos posted on YouTube, you now have seen what I've seen. There's just something about that night in Canadian Texas that just doesn't feel right. I will say this, though. I think this episode illustrates the kind of work and investigating that should be done in every missing persons case out there on every program out there. This is what Unfound tries to do with every episode. Granted, that's not always possible, considering sometimes there just isn't a lot of evidence. There isn't as much video, or as many witnesses, or as many details. So in this instance, I just feel very lucky and fortunate that I've seemingly contributed something meaningful to the investigation of Thomas Brown's disappearance. And I deeply thank Penny Meek for giving me the opportunity. With that, I'll leave the discussion of Thomas Brown's case in your hands. And that's the program. If you found it informative, please go to the app that you use to listen to Unfound and give this podcast a great review. I thank you for listening. I'm Ed Densel, and you've been listening to Unfound.